60 bucks on it.
We're ready to go? Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this Committee of the Whole, Monday, March 3rd, 2025, both to folks that are here in the room as well as online. And I'd like to start this meeting in a good way by acknowledging with gratitude that we live and work on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish, whose peoples have been stewards of these lands and waters surrounding Nick-Bethlehem, Bowen Island. As this is a bit more of a public meeting today, I think I will start as I usually do in council meetings by introducing the elected members of our council, starting all by our lonesome here on the far left. We have Councillor Alison Morse. To my far right, we have Councillor Islands Trustee Stu Ellen Fast. To her left is Councillor Islands Trustee Judy Getty. And joining us online today is Councillor Tim Wake, Councillor Alex Jurgensen, and John Saunders may be joining us later online. We're also joined by members of our professional staff team here today, including our Deputy Corporate Officer, Steph Short. And on the other side of the room, which can't be seen right now, we have our Chief Financial Officer, Kristen Watson, and our Director of Engineering, Patrick Grant. This meeting is a proceeding of the business of local government. We all love our community. We are all passionate about what happens here. I'd encourage everyone to maintain a constructive and respectful tone during the meeting and to direct public comments and question and answers during those periods of the meeting to myself. For those that are following along online, the full agenda package, including staff reports, is available at bowenislandmunicipality.ca. And with that, I will look to our Deputy Corporate Officer for the introduction of any late items today.
We have no late items.
Seeing no late items, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Moved by Councillor Fast, seconded by Councillor Getty. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And that carries unanimously. Moving on to public comments, I'll look to our Deputy Corporate Officer for any public comments here today.
I did not have anyone register for public comments, but we have several people in the waiting room. If the mayor would like to consider a last minute request for public comments.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If there's anybody online that would like to make public comments, please put your hand up by Zoom or put your camera on and give us a wave.
In the chat. You can also ask questions in the chat. I'm seeing nothing in the chat. I'm seeing no hands.
Okay.
So looks like we're listening for now.
So we will move on if there are question and answers. I know that we don't have it on the agenda, but I will open the floor up for question and answers from the public after item 4.2. So the first item on the agenda then is 4.1 Draft Utilities 2025 to 2029 Financial Plan. I'll turn it over to our CFO, Kristen Watson.
Well, thank you, Mayor Leonard and members of council. I've put together a presentation. Patrick and I worked on this presentation to provide an overview of the 2025 to 2029 operating and financial plan for each of our 8 local service area utilities. So I'll just take a moment now to share my screen with you. And okay. So thank you for this opportunity to present to council. I'm going to start with some of our overview of our planning assumptions that are built into this budget. There is a very dedicated staffing allocation formula that is shared by all of the different water and sewer local service areas. We have an administrative cost allocation formula that acts to take some of the costs from the utilities, from the general fund and move them over into the utilities fund. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We're going to then move into a detailed review of each of the 7 water and 1 sewer system. And then I wanted to take the opportunity to just check, Mayor Leonard, if you would like an opportunity at the end of each presentation for each water system, just to check in either with council or to check with members of the public if they had questions, to let those questions be asked at the end of each presentation, or did you want to hold them all to the end?
Well, that's a great question. So given that most of the folks are online, so let's riff a little bit of a process here. We will, if folks online have questions, maybe throw them into the chat online. We'll just see if there's a volume of questions, but otherwise I think it might be good to see all of the water systems in context, and then we'll do questions about the water and sewer systems after that.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. So one of the basic underlying assumptions that we have built into this plan, of course, is the cost of living allowance for 2025. Our union staff, whom all of our outside utility workers are unionized, will be receiving a 3.5% cost of living increase according to the terms of the collective agreement. And our exempt staff follow our council policy, which provides for an annual allowance of the average change year over year from November to November in the CPI for Greater Vancouver. In this budget, I do use an estimate of 3% to inflate ongoing costs for years 2 to 5 for 2026 through 2029 in the budget. In the budget report, there's quite a bit of detail about how we allocate our staffing resources. But in this table, it is included within the budget report, but it does show that we allocate the direct costs and the indirect costs of administrative staff among all of the water systems based on their proportionate number of properties within each district. So Cove Bay takes more than 50% of the cost of all of the regular staffing. And Cove Bay also has dedicated treatment plant operator staffing, as well as the sewer treatment plant has dedicated treatment plant staffing that is only shared by those two utilities. So the rest of the staff are allocated across each system based on their proportionate share of properties. Some of the underlying assumptions of the administrative costs, the same report, the 5-year financial plan for the utilities, does include a detailed allocation schedule for administrative expenses. So I'll leave it to you to look at that schedule in detail. I'm certainly able to answer any questions about it. But the reason that we do that is because there are administrative staff that spend a significant amount of time to manage or time spent on administration and management of the water system. So for example, my finance team spends a considerable amount of time posting payments for water systems, creating the utility bills, sending them out, fielding questions on the phone. In the Public Works Department, there's administrative staff who deal with meter reading questions, consolidate those meter readings, things like that. So what we do is we strive to equitably distribute back to the water systems a bit of that time in order to ensure that the general fund, which pays for all of those staff, is fairly compensated for the utilities time spent by those staff. So this ratio we establish at the beginning of each year, and it is found on page 3 of the water and sewer utility budget report. I wanted to take a moment just to give you a quick overview, a comparison of the user rates and parcel taxes charged in each of the different local service areas. You can see that they vary on the low end from $9.55 per year in Hood Point to a high end of an average of $14.91 per year in Bowen Bay and King Edward Bay. What we've done is we're really working towards trying to harmonize the rates in all of the water districts. We've now got Tunstall Bay, Bowen Bay, King Edward Bay, and Blue Water Park all on the exact same user rate. Also, it's important, I think, to notice in 2 of the areas, while they do have a lower annual user rate, they also both Hood Point and Eagle Cliff include a dedicated parcel tax, which goes directly to their reserve funds. And I think what's interesting about that is you look at those 2 local service areas that have had that dedicated parcel tax as a contribution to their reserve fund in place. They seem to be much more financially strong than the other local service areas. So Hood Point, with its 98 users, has almost as much in reserve as Cove Bay does with 6.5 times the size. So it's they have an average of 8,861 per property in their reserve fund, whereas Cove Bay only has about 1,382. So this is an overview of a snapshot, and I think what it does is kind of provide us with a view of what the relative financial strength is of each of those water systems side by side. I think moving forward, our goal should be to move towards uniform rates because of the way that we allocate all of our operational expenses. Most of them are distributed on this pro rata basis equally or equitably among all water systems. So we're recommending that we move towards a model where all municipal water users are going to be paying the same basic rate for operations. Of course, there are expenses that are directly allocated to each system and they differ within the systems. Those include hydro charges, the property insurance for each of the assets within a system, any subcontracted labor or machinery costs to undertake repairs or maintenance in a system are directly allocated to that system. Any system that has their reservoir cleaned in a year, all of those fees would go direct to that system as well. And each one has its own dedicated set of like telephone lines, SCADA and communications monitoring equipment. Those very much are very easily tracked to the system. And of course, the debt service costs incurred in any one of those systems goes directly and is not shared among other systems. Snug Cove Sewer and Cove Bay Water also have additional things because of the treatment plant. So they're going to have a different direct allocation of supplies and chemicals that are purchased for those operations that are also not shared with other systems, as well as the direct staffing allocation, which I spoke of earlier. So there is a lot of variability in the financial health of each of the systems. They're all in kind of various states of disrepair. And the reserve fund balances, as I demonstrated on that chart, they vary significantly by system. So work on the work list this year is to complete a utilities funding policy in 2025. And what we want to do is to entrench the concept that utilities should operate on a self-funded basis. We want to identify the conditions under which general municipal funds may be used. And we want to set out a timeline for repayment of any of general municipal funds used by a utility. This policy and the intent is to establish a framework for the budget development. It's going to encourage the move towards a uniform user rate structure. I'm hoping that it is going to set out a minimum annual reserve fund contribution within each system. And by doing so, it will establish target reserve fund balances. It will identify what an eligible use of surplus would be, and as well as identify a timeline in order to bring all systems in line with the policy. This will effectively move us towards a harmonized rate system. And the way that we're going to get there is by adjusting the revenue requirements in each local service area through the imposition of parcel taxes if they're required. So if we need additional revenue in one local service area and the common user rate isn't enough to collect that revenue, that's when we would consider looking at a parcel tax as a dedicated contribution to reserves, such as they have in Hood Point and Euclid, in order to just help get to that point where we want to be according to this new policy. The good thing about the parcel tax method is that they're charged on the tax notice and they're eligible for the property tax deferral program. So we'll move into Cove Bay Water to start, and I will turn it over to Patrick, who has a few words to say about what's going on with Cove Bay.
Okay. Maybe I'll start off by addressing the ongoing issues we've been having with the Cove Bay water treatment plant. We continue to have problems with the ceramic filters that are supplied by Purifix. The plant is currently operating with one of the two filter modules in operation. It is meeting water quality objectives in terms of turbidity, and it's providing substantially improved water quality However, it's still not meeting, it's not passing the direct integrity test, which is the measure of whether it's meeting all of the Vancouver coastal health requirements for water quality. The other filter has more significant issues and has been taken offline. Purifics will be on site in early March. We're hoping this week, but we haven't got confirmation of that yet. To repair the filters and ensure that we can operate with both of the filters meeting all water quality objectives. The other issue that we're having with the plant is the ability to demonstrate that the filters can meet the rated capacity. We haven't yet been able to demonstrate that, and it's been hampered by the fact that we haven't had a fully functioning system up to this point. And so that's something that is significant because we're looking at some significant growth in the future within the system with developments like the Lakelands by Grafton Lake and also the planned connection of the Eagle Cliff system. So demonstrating the rated capacity is going to be very important for us. Looking at some of the other proposed capital projects in Cove Bay, we've got, there's a water main that you can see there that crosses Terminal Creek at the Carter Road Bridge. That is significantly deformed and at high risk of failure from something like a large debris flow coming down the creek during high flow conditions. There is also a leak on the west side of the bridge that is at a very difficult to repair location. And we're proposing a new water main that's attached to the new bridge. And we've budgeted, we're currently looking at, we're currently getting design completed for that. And we've budgeted a $400,000 amount to cover the costs of replacing that high-risk water main. There's also some improvements required at the Grafton Lake Dam. The beaver exclusion fencing is in disrepair and not doing its intended job of keeping the beavers out. It needs to be replaced. We're also looking at tying in the gravity, the low flow pipe that discharges the required amount for fisheries purposes, low flow discharge, tying that into the standpipe next to Grafton Lake. That will provide the ability to keep the low flow discharge running and also allowing withdrawals from the lake. So when there's need for water, it doesn't necessarily need to be taken from a hydrant if that's not, if treated water is not required. There's two pressure reducing valves along Miller Road that protect the area with asbestos cement pipe. And that area has fairly frequent failures of the service connections on that AC pipe. And it's important that we maintain those pressure reducing valves in good repair. So there's been $150,000 budgeted for those replacements. And then looking into probably next year, there's a number of service connections that are on the old main, an old 2-inch line that needs to be switched over to a parallel newer 6-inch line. So that's something we're looking at for next year. Looking at longer term projects in Cove Bay, we've got I mentioned earlier we've got a fair amount of asbestos cement pipe, and we often see failures mainly at poorly installed service connections. And we'd be looking at replacing that water main and service connections over time. It's a fairly costly project to replace all the AC pipe in the system, probably around $3 million. So we're going to need to come up with a long-range plan for achieving that. Another problem water main that we've had is on Peterson Road, which is up off of Channelview, I believe. Taylor Road, sorry. And that's a poor quality pipe that we see frequent failures that need to have repairs. So there's an estimated $400,000 needed over time to replace that. This is really highlighting that we need to develop asset management plans that include long-range capital replacement plans for the Cove Bay system, and this is the same objective that will apply to all the other systems as well, so that we have a better handle on what the needs are going to be over the next 10 years and 30 years.
Patrick? I think as well what that highlights is the need to generate more revenue in Cove Bay. This year in 2024, Cove Bay missed its revenue target by about $45,000. That's a good, it's good on one hand because Cove Bay has got a metered rate bill. It tends to mean that people are being more conservative and they're using less water, and that's what we want. We want to preserve the capacity of the water treatment plant for as long as we can. We really do want to encourage people to use less water. On the other hand, if that means that there will be a revenue shortfall, then we will need to adjust the rates in order to address that. So we are proposing this year, we're recommending that changes be implemented for the Cove Bay rates. Also, just taking a look at it from a high level perspective, Cove Bay annual rates are one of the lower ones charged among all water users in the district. So another reason why we really do feel the need to increase the rates this year. So the recommendation is that we increase the flat rate from $294 per billing period to $340 per billing period. We lower the first threshold. There's a tiered rate of consumption based. So we're proposing that we lower the first tier from 92 cubic meters per billing period down to 17 meters per billing period. And the rate charged on that usage be increased to 50 cents per cubic meter. I think it's 10.5 cents right now. We also propose adding a second tier from 71 cubic meters to 100 and adding a consumption charge of $1 for every cubic meter charged in that threshold. And the third tier would be applied to all use over 100 cubic meters, and that we're recommending be charged at $1.90 per cubic meter. Doing a bit of analysis on that, looking at what that impact would be to a typical user. So this chart here shows, well, first of all, what it shows is how many of the users are really on the lower end of the threshold. So if we're looking at that usage at say 50 or 25 cubic meters per billing period, that's over half of the residential, that's over half of the connections in the district are using that low rate, less than 50 cubic meters per billing period. So that's why we do see a need to increase the rates from the, even on the lowest users. So comparison rates, if somebody was using 50 cubic meters in 2024, they could expect to be charged $299.25. Under this proposed rate structure, they can expect their rate to go up to $365. So the annual rates would be, the increase would be different based on what average level of consumption any particular property owner is at. But they do range anywhere from an increase of 19 to 27%, looks like the highest one there. And of course, that does much of it is going to be collected through the increase in the proposed increase in the annual flat rate. Or the Cove Bay is not quarterly, it's billed 3 times a year, so it's billed once every 4 months. Looking at the financial plan in Cove Bay for 2025. Under this revenue structure, we do expect to see about a 10% increase to revenue in the first year, about an 8% increase in the second year, And then going forward, potentially looking at annual increases in the 5% range. 2025 includes a one-time use of surplus, and that will be contributed to the general fund, and that is in order to pay the Cove Bay share of the Grafton Lake Watershed Management Plan. Staffing budget, it includes a pro rata share of one new full-time utility operator position, which is being requested by the manager of the utility operations manager. There has been a business case put forward in the 5-year financial plan budget report, where a significant amount of the added workload that has been increased since the municipality took over the water systems it is detailed in that report. Did you want to say anything further about the 1.0 position?
No, I guess I could say that we've got 7 water systems and 1 sewer system. And in order to operate and maintain all of those systems, we've got 1 water treatment plant operator that's responsible for 2 plants, a utility operations manager, and then 4 utility operators. It's not a lot of staff for the amount of work that's involved. And what we're finding is that we struggle to have enough staff support provided to the treatment plant operator, and that we're really only able to deal with more or less emergency situations, water main breaks that need to be repaired and that sort of thing. And the ability to be proactive and to really properly manage each of these water systems the way they deserve to be managed requires more staff support. And really, 1 additional person is a bare minimum. I would expect that we'd be requesting additional support in subsequent years as well, but it would certainly be helpful to add additional utility operator to our complement of staff resources that are available to operate these systems.
Thank you. Cove Bay budget, it does include an annual interest payment for the $2.5 million debt that was taken out to build the water treatment plant. It also includes an annual transfer into the reserve funds. And it does also include an annual transfer to the general fund. So in order to complete construction of the water treatment plant, Cove Bay did have to take out long-term debenture debt with the Municipal Finance Authority. And as well, it required a $1.1 million temporary bridging finance loan from the general fund. So this amount is being repaid over a 10-year period by an annual transfer of $124,000 each year. Now that 10-year bridging internal finance loan, that expires in 2030. The annual transfer to the general fund, you'll see this in each of the water systems, and it includes an annual amount which is contributed to the municipal equipment reserve, and those funds are then used to replace the trucks and the vehicles and any of the specialized equipment used by the water systems. And you can see in 2025 in the operating budget, the transfer to the general fund is increased by $25,000, and that's in respect of that $25,000 use of reserve funds, which is going to be transferred in order to pay for the Grafton Lake Watershed Management Plan. I think as Patrick mentioned, we do have some pretty significant planned capital expenditures planned for the Cove Bay Water District. We do have a $400,000 water main replacement. Is that $150,000 PRV replacement along Miller Road, as well as $60,000 of improvements to Grafton Lake Dam, and that is all included for the 2025 budget year. The internal loan payment per year, as I said, it expires in 2030. And once that expires, then there will be additional room in the budget, and that can then begin to be recontributed back into the reserve fund to begin to address the other long-term projects that we haven't really included in the budget, or we haven't really found a funding source for yet. We just have included them in the report to make people aware of them, but it is really important to start replenishing those reserve funds. So this new utilities policy work that we're doing this year is going to provide a good framework to help develop the reserve fund strategy for Cove Bay and for all of the other water systems as well. Definitely in Cove Bay, we need to consider the possibility in the future of implementing parcel taxes in order to replenish and augment those Cove Bay reserve funds. So I wanted to take a break. I wanted to provide a break for questions, or I can keep going.
There is one online from James who says, when do you plan to integrate the billing of the water systems to achieve one rate for everyone?
I think that will be set out by the approved policy, but I think ideally it would be achieved within a 3 to 5 year period.
Councillor Morse.
I just don't quite understand that last question. Is he suggesting that everybody be charged exactly the same amount? Or flat rate and the thing, or the same style of bill?
I believe we would be well placed to work towards a rate that is a uniform and the same across all of the water districts. And then where we need to make up shortfalls or additional revenue requirements, we use the parcel tax in order to do that.
And so one other question, I've got several questions, but with respect to this additional staff person, how much time does it take with quarterly billing? They've got to go and read the meters 4 times a year and Cove Bay 3 times a year. How much time does it take to read the meters?
Well, it doesn't take extra time because, you know, we already are reading the meters monthly in those systems. Now we're only reading them every 3 months, but we're doing it 4 times a year. So those smaller systems are just changing the number of readings that they're having, changing the timing of the readings, but they're not actually having additional readings.
Okay, it wasn't additional. I guess my question was related to comparing the futures, the cost savings of not reading the meters and having remote read meters and working towards a gradual change of one comment, but a bunch of meters need to be replaced. So we replace them with remote read meters. And how much is that, you know, the cost benefit analysis of not having that staff time to do that, being able to instantly read a meter when somebody thinks there's water shortage and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know, versus, you know, that's the equivalent of one staff position to read meters, that maybe it's better to change the meter.
Yeah, we haven't done the full cost benefit analysis on that remote read meter project. It is a fairly significant capital investment to replace all the meters with smart meters. And we don't have a good picture at this point of what the payback period would be on that.
And some of the meters may not need a whole change, they may just need a little module added to it. I'm talking to the guys at QBCM. Depending on which kind of meter it is, how new it is.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Over to you, Councillor Getty.
The administrative cost allocation formula. So half of the people on Bowen are on their own wells and their own septics. And Cove Bay has the illustrious benefit of being on both the water treatment and the sewer treatment, not all of Cove Bay water, but so when the allocation is figured out, that puts an extra tax bill on the users of the system. Does that come off the bill that goes out to the rest of the people that are on the private system? I'm just wondering, I'm a member of the Cove Bay water system. So if I pay extra to my water bill allocation in terms of the staff time that's spent on that, is that subtracted from my general tax bill so that I'm not paying twice?
You're not paying twice because, for example, say 30% of Patrick and my time is charged to the water systems, and only 70% of Patrick and my time goes to general funds, which is paid for through your tax bill.
Okay, so that, and with respect to developing, the fact that Copley doesn't have as much, in terms of the number of, hookups as other districts in terms of reserves, does that take into consideration the debt and interest payment that we've had for 10 years now?
Yeah, they're all funded through the user rates.
So in none of the other districts, Eagle Cliff will be, if this expansion goes through, they'll have a debt, but none of the others, maybe Tunstall does.
Sun still has debt, Blue Water has significant debt.
They've just taken that on last year, right?
Yeah, there's no debt in King Edward Bay or Bowen Bay, and at this time, there's no debt in Eagle Cliff.
Okay. And would that be on top of, if we have this standard cost for, we establish the framework so that there's equal water costs? So that the debt of each district will be added to whatever that standard water rate is?
Well, you see the debt payments coming through on each budget for each local service area. And as we go through each one, I'll make a point of highlighting those line items in the operations budget. But those ones that have debt also have a corresponding parcel tax as a revenue line item in order to make sure that the expenses are covered by the annual revenue. And they're not drawing from their reserve fund every year to pay down debt, because if you do that, you're gonna run out of money eventually. You gotta collect enough from the current year.
So the parcel tax is in addition to the actual use of the water. And the, what you're trying to establish is a system across the entire island with respect to water usage and the cost of water?
I'm trying to ensure that the user rate is the same for everybody among all water systems. The parcel tax, if we need to collect additional revenue in any given system, we move that to a parcel tax method of collecting. It could be as a dedicated contribution to reserves. It could be needed in order to pay debt. But there is a bit of unfairness in that if people want to take advantage of the property tax deferral program, we want to ensure that we transfer a little bit of the utility cost to a property tax bill in order to enable people to take advantage of that program and try and keep everybody's annual monthly expenditure for water the same across the island.
So if I may, one more, the chart that you had for, the change in the user rate for Cove Bay, people that were using 70 imperial gallons or less a day and going up to something at, is it 200?
Yeah, I just gave
Yep.
different.
So, is that, it seems to me that increasing the charge for the people that are using so little and trying to conserve, which is important in that district with Grafton Lake, that this increase to the low end is counterproductive in terms of people trying to conserve, as opposed to the relatively small, I would say insignificant percentage change for the very high users. So I don't know who's using, I can't imagine using over 150 or 150 cubic meters per billing period. Although that's including some of the commercial areas with all the visitors and whatever. But is that negotiable? Is that can that be reconsidered? I think that we should be having, personally, I think we should be having a principle where we encourage conservation and not penalize people with an increase.
The other difficulty with Cove Bay is the existence of multifamily housing. So you've got several developments the housing down here, you've got the apartment building on Trunk Road, you've got Belterra, you've got potentially coming up Birch and things like that, where they have the one connection. So obviously their consumption is going to be high over the course of the billing period, yet you're serving 30 households out of that. So because all of the other districts are basically all single family residential, they're very comparable. And this is also the struggle in trying to predict where revenues are gonna be in Cove Bay is there's just such a variability in the types of buildings that the water district serves. So I think what we need to do before we just point to the top tier users and point fingers at them and say, oh, you guys are all using too much, or you're all the businesses and you're using too much and we need to penalize that. What I think we need to do, and what happens in other municipalities, is develop a couple of different rate structures. So you'll have a multifamily rate structure, or you'll have a commercial rate structure, or you'll have something else. For now, all we have is one. I absolutely think that we need to do more work on that, more analysis, and better identify the types of connections that we have. But I don't want you to think that, oh, those 10% of people that are using over 100, it's the school, it's the building on Trunk Road, it's this development down here. So
Okay. That helps explain the lower one, but I still think it does increase penalizes the lower ones, and that needs to be looked at as well.
The other factor is that there's a cost per cubic meter. There's certain costs to produce the water, chemicals, power, that should be paid regardless of how much is being used. And prior to last year, there was no variable charge for the lowest end. And that was raised to somewhere around 10 cents in order to collect something. But it was still well below what the actual variable cost per cubic meter is to produce a cubic meter of water and deliver it. So
Well, that's more understandable than simply saying that, to try and raise it. I mean, that's a better reason than just trying to raise it to get revenue, more revenue. User pay. All right.
Okay, seeing no further questions, moving on.
thank you. Next system we will discuss is the Hood Point water system. And I'll turn it over to Patrick.
okay. So the Hood Point water system has its own treatment plant and contains supply from Honeymoon Lake. Some of the issues that we've been dealing with in that system, there's a higher than desirable level of concentration of disinfection byproducts. So trihalomethanes and haloacetic acids, THMs and HAAs. There's guidelines for what the concentration would be in drinking water, and we've been exceeding that in the Hood Point system. We've tried increasing the flushing within the system, both in terms of numbers of locations where flushing is occurring and the continuous rate that water is being flushed. That hasn't brought these THM and HAA levels down to acceptable levels. So we've been working with urban systems to look at coming up with the most appropriate strategy for dealing with that. It looks like it's the level of organics in the source water from Honeymoon Lake that's the issue, and that those organics react with the chlorine that gets added prior to distribution and forms those disinfection byproducts. So some additional filtration, likely carbon filtration, probably combined with some sort of coagulant, would remove those organics or a large portion of those organics prior to adding the chlorine and prevent the disinfection byproducts from being formed in the first place. So we're just working through the process of getting the details confirmed of what type of filters should be added, whether they can be fit within the existing treatment plant building or whether some sort of addition needs to be added. So there is a $400,000 amount that's budgeted there, That could be substantially less if we're able to fit the required equipment within the existing structure. And so I'm hopeful that we won't need really close to that amount of budget. But it is a high priority project because these levels are, exceeding the acceptable guidelines, and we want to deliver water that's as safe as possible to residents. So that's probably the biggest issue within the Hood Point system, and we are moving forward on addressing that. The other system is the UV system that's currently in place doesn't meet VCH requirements. And it is the limiting factor in terms of the capacity of the plant. And also there's no redundancy. There's one UV unit. If it goes down, there's no backup. So we're planning to replace that system and with a system that increases capacity, meets VCH requirements, and adds some redundancy. And we've got a $60,000 budget for doing that in 2025.
Taking a look at the Hood Point water system, their 2024 and future revenues in the financial plan. This is one of the systems that does impose an annual parcel tax for no other purpose than to contribute to its reserves. It has no debt either. We are recommending a modest 4% annual increase to both the user rates and the parcel taxes in the Hood Point water system. Just looking at what those annual proposed revenues would be in 2025 through 2029. We estimate the annual revenue in 2025 under this rate recommendation would be just over 144,000, growing to just over 169,000 in 2029 if we did apply an annual 4% increase. There are no unusual or extraordinary expenses planned within the Hood Point operational budget. We do have a provision for a Hood Point share of the proposed new utility operator wages. We are continuing to prioritize a dedicated annual contribution to the Hood Point Reserve Fund. And this is going to be more important going forward when those proposed capital projects within the Hood Point do take place, because they will be drawing down the reserve fund to pay for it. The Hood Point budget includes that annual transfer to the general fund in accordance with the overhead cost allocation schedule. And what that does is pay for those annual contributions to equipment reserve and for replacements and use of tools and supplies, etc. In the capital budget, as Patrick mentioned, we do have a provision for up to $460,000 withdrawal from the reserve fund. And that would be used in order to construct this new building and install this new UV filtration treatment equipment. Additionally, there's an annual $15,000 provision set each year, and we've just put that aside as a contingency in case there's pumps or other equipment that requires replacement in each given year. In the event that we do proceed and go forward with those capital projects, you will see how the reserve fund would be drawn down significantly in order to pay for these projects, going from a reserve fund balance right now of $868,000 would be down to just over $478,000 next year. And then we would endeavor to increase that each year by a dedicated reserve fund contribution. But we don't contemplate the need for any debt in order to go forward with this project. So I'll take the time. Are there any questions with regards to the Hood Point water area?
Councilor Morse.
On the beginning bit under water supply and storage, you talk about the tank needs to be cleaned regularly. What does regularly mean?
Well, that's a good question. We've been cleaning it more frequently. I think that we've cleaned it every 2 or 3 years, and part of that was trying to reduce the disinfection byproducts thinking was that maybe there was organic material building up in the tank, and if we cleaned it out more frequently, we'd be able to reduce those disinfection byproduct levels. We still don't achieve the reductions that we need.
So are you suggesting it be cleaned every year? And I'm assuming cleaning is pressure washing the walls and sucking it all out and draining the tank.
Yeah, we've gotten divers to do the tank cleaning
Oh, okay.
in prior years. I think it was done last year.
And under water system challenges, there was a consultant engaged. Now, has the report been actually issued and received?
We don't have a final report. We do have a preliminary memo, looking at it just.
So all these numbers are based on the preliminary memo, not the.
Yeah, they're not, so it's not very solid, but that's why it's likely higher.
Okay, and then I'm confused about the comment on the next page about a portion of the system is served by water mains that are undersized, because as I recall, just after we incorporated, they were in the process of putting in new underground water mains and everything, so I'm surprised that they aren't all up to required plus standards for size.
There are some that aren't.
Are they on the old Eagle Road?
That I'm not sure. I would have to
Okay,
look
because
at the.
I think that's the only part of the system that didn't need to be done, because if they're not really part of that point householders group. Okay, and then I guess with this, the water storage reservoir tank is undersized, so how big does it need to be?
Well, in order to meet fire protection requirements, something like the size of the King Edward Bay tank,
Even though it's only 98, it's how much you need for one house fire.
pretty much, yeah.
And then the UV unit, you're still gonna have UV and you're adding sand filters. So
No.
what is,
No, we have sand filters. We'd be adding carbon filters.
oh, carbon filters, okay. That wasn't, it says the sand filters can process significantly more water than the UV unit, so.
Yeah, they can. So the UV is limiting the capacity of the plant.
Okay, and what does Vancouver Coastal Health require for UV flow?
Well, they have requirements, like there's certain types of UV systems that they approve that are certified, and what we have now doesn't meet those. And
They
then,
changed their requirements, because they would have had to have a permit from PCH before any of that work was done.
they may have changed the requirements. I'm not sure how long ago that UV system was installed, but it doesn't meet their current requirements.
And do the requirements depend on how many houses are being serviced? I'm just thinking of the cost for the bigger systems as well.
Yeah, the UV system has to be designed for your peak flows to distribution. And so right now, what we've got for UV is able to process maybe half as much as what the sand filters can push through. So we're not able to go above that level.
And the carbon filters will be able to push through as much as the sand filter.
Yes.
Okay, I really think that would get for. Well, I guess there's one general question which I was gonna save to the end. When I was looking at the insurance allocation. A $7,000 premium for a full year. Just doesn't seem for all the water systems, this doesn't seem like a.
It's just the liability portion. They still have their property insurance.
No,
which
this is
direct
property
allocated.
insurance.
No, it's liability.
Oh, under facility costs, work yard, property insurance, and then I've got to go down. So property insurance is this line that's in here then is legal insurance and audit.
Yep, all of the different types of insurances are included in there. But we do get a separate bill for property insurance, which sets out all of the different assets in each So service
So
area
each-
and general
each-
assets, so each
entity
local
is
service
charged
area
for their
charges their
actual.
own direct.
So is there a
property.
list somewhere?
Have one person talking, I can hear both.
Is there one person, is there a schedule somewhere that says how much their assets are insured for and what assets are insured?
It is an internal insurance document that we have, yeah.
So you could tell each of the systems that your assets are insured for $1 million, yours are insured for 3 million, and, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Many of the assets in water systems are uninsurable, so anything under the ground is uninsurable. It's only so, for example, the reservoir tanks, and in the case of Hood Point, that big water pipe that comes down from Honeymoon Lake, so. So there will be very different insurance allocations between the systems.
Affected that. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Morse. I'm not seeing any further questions online or from council, so
Move on.
move on, yeah.
All right, thank you. Next, we're moving on to Tunstall Bay. And I'll turn it over to Patrick again.
Okay, so Tunstall Bay is one of our groundwater supplied water systems, which is all of the water systems on the west side of the island. One of the things that we've done recently is, and this was required by Vancouver Coastal Health, is to conduct GARP assessments for all of the wells that are providing water to our municipal systems. So that stands for groundwater at risk pathogens. What we found is that there were risk factors for pretty much all of the municipal wells that are serving our systems, meaning they get classified as GARP wells, and VCH requires that UV treatment be provided in addition to chlorination. And for a lot of those wells, we don't currently have UV treatment. In the case of Tunstall Bay, where there's a number of different wells at different locations, it would make sense to install a central treatment facility that provides UV treatment and chlorination to all of the wells coming into the one common location. That would probably be either by the reservoir storage tanks or on the road up to that location. And so we've included a $350,000 budget item to allow for constructing a new treatment facility that captures all of the Tunstall Bay wells. The other issue that we've had in the Tunstall Bay system is two major water main breaks that occurred in 2023. In the course of repairing those failures, we've confirmed that there is a section of that water main along White Sails Drive that's shallow and poorly bedded, and really should be replaced and installed properly. We're looking at next year rehabilitation of White Sails Drive, the road itself, and it would make sense to coordinate the road rehabilitation and the water main repair. So we're looking at budgeting $150,000 in 2026 to do that water main repair. It's a fairly high rate per meter because we're anticipating that some blasting may be required. Probably some of the reason it's very as shallow as it is because of the bedrock location along that section of water main. So those are the two main issues that we need to deal with.
All right. Looking at the results for Tunstall, they also missed their revenue target in 2024 by about 9,737. Again, I would chalk this up to increased conscientious water use, because they do have an increasing metered rate structure in Tunstall Bay as well. So in order to plan the budget for 2025, we've reduced the expected budget revenue. We are increasing a rate of 5% across the board for flat rates as well as metered rates. And we believe that this increase will yield a reasonable target revenue estimate of $200,995. Whoops, skipped one. In Tunstall Bay, we are recommending that we increase the parcel tax by $100. This parcel tax is currently $565 for connected properties and $60 per year for, or sorry, $400 per year for unconnected properties. Now, the rate structure in Tunstall Bay, this is the same rate structure that's also in place and being recommended for the West Side system. So you'll see this come up again. But the flat rate in 2024 was $324 quarterly. We are recommending that that be increased by 5% to $340 quarterly. And then metered rates charges are charged for every gallon that is used. So it starts at 0.0033 cents for the first gallon, going up to everything over 18,000 gallons for the quarterly billing period, being charged at 0.0127 cents per gallon. So a 5% increase applied to those metered rates. You can see the annual increases there that we're recommending. The bills are sent out every 3 months, so that minimum flat rate is $340 plus variable charges for all water use. It's also interesting to note that in these 4 West Side districts that all of the unconnected properties as well pay quarterly flat rate user charges, and those rates are set at 60% of the connected user rate. For the parcel tax piece, there is a parcel tax in Tunstall Bay, and it was imposed and it's collected for debt related to the construction of their water tank that was built in 2022. We're recommending to increase this by $100 per connected property, and that will bring the annual revenue collection to $92,845 per year. I want to just kind of share with you where we're at with that Tunstall Bay water tank loan. The loan, it was taken out in September 2022 for $655,000. To date, we have repaid $278,000 in principal, leaving an outstanding balance of $376,000. That loan has an expiry date of 5 years from the date it was taken out. So we are required to repay the principal in full by September 27th, September 24th, 2027. Now, what we did, and we did this deliberately, was we only had a 5-year window to borrow the funds, but we wanted to stretch the collection over 6 or 7 years to just keep the parcel tax lower for the people in Tunstall Bay. And what we're doing and what we had always intended to do was just kind of offer some interim financing from 1 year to the next. We do this with, we're proposing to do this with use of the general fund. So in 2027, we are proposing that we transfer $100,000 from the general fund into Tunstall Bay so that there's sufficient money there in order to make that required final repayment on the 5-year loan. And what we'll do then is charge the parcel tax for 1 more year on the residents in Tunstall Bay and repay that loan to the general fund the very next year. So it's like an interim bridging financing loan. In the Tunstall Bay Water District, there are no extraordinary or unusual expenses planned for Tunstall Bay Water as well. The same staffing pro rata allocation of the additional FTE operator position has been included. And you can see here in 2027, we'll take that additional money that's been transferred from the general fund and use it to repay the outstanding principal on the Tunstall Bay loan. And back in 2028, you'll see there is an extra $100,000 being transferred back in to the general fund, and that will repay the temporary bridging finance loan. So that ended up stretching the 5-year loan into a 7-year loan effectively. So that just helped to keep the the parcel tax a bit lower for the people in Tunstall Bay because it was going to be punitive, be high. What we need to increase the parcel tax now for is because of these capital projects that Patrick has outlined. So just gonna skip through here. So there are some pretty significant capital expenditures. Patrick's identified $150,000 for the White Sails water main replacement, as well as up to $350,000. I propose that we put it in over the budget and complete the work over a 2-year period. And to ensure that there's sufficient reserve funds in there to meet the capital requirements of completing those 2 projects. That's going to drive the need to increase the parcel tax in the Tunstall Bay area. And without that bridge interim financing, you could see here that Tunstall Bay would be going into a deficit in 2027, given the addition of these new capital projects, which hadn't shown up in their capital budget prior to now. So any questions for Tunstall Bay? We're happy to take those.
Councillor Getty.
If you go back 1 slide, please.
Yep.
So the 275, my understanding is that you've got 350,000 for the something that for purification near the storage tank, a new building, and then 150,000 to replace a water main. That's 500,000, right? The math, 350 plus 150, and this is what? 400?
That's 350 split over.
So we're splitting the 350 into 2026 and 2027, and we expect that project will take more than a year to finish. And then the 150 we've got in 2026.
Okay. Thank you.
Not seeing any further questions online or around the table. So
Okay. Eagle Cliff?
maybe I will say, I'm just going to interject here for folks that might be recording this later. If there are questions, feel free to reach out to Mayor and Council at bimbc.ca, to any of the individual councillors. We're always happy to hear from you, including myself at mayor@bimbc.ca. Or you can call or get in touch with the municipality to ask questions of staff as well.
Yes, email called to water at bimbc.ca.
Right, or water@bimbc.ca. Just throwing that right in the middle here for anybody that might be watching this on YouTube later, or for folks online or here in person that might have questions later on. That's fast.
Just also, I found the pages 2 and 3 right at the top of the report, a really helpful overview of where we're at and why changes are needed and changes over time, including climate change impacts that are affecting all of this. So for anybody who might be watching, right at the beginning of the report, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so in Eagle Cliff, the biggest project upcoming is the proposed connection to the Cove Bay system. So a 1.3 kilometer long water main connecting the north end of the Cove Bay water system to the south end of the Eagle Cliff water system. The objective of that project is to resolve the water quantity and quality issues that Eagle Cliff experiences, providing a reliable source of water supply. The current primary source for the Eagle Cliff system is the Carpenter Creek Reservoir, which has significant leakage. And the dam that creates that reservoir is leaking significantly, resulting in very low water levels at times during the summer. And there's no water filtration that's provided for that surface water source. So the objective is to provide water treatment plant at Cove Bay to the Eagle Cliff system. There's been grant funding that's been secured for that project to cover up to 73.3% of the project costs to 1.5 million. And there's been approval to borrow up to 820,000 on behalf of the Eagle Cliff service area. And that borrowing was conditional on Cold Bay Water Treatment Plant being complete and in operation. That work was tendered in August of 2024, along with the Blue Water water system replacement work. It was awarded to NB Contracting. Council has directed staff not to proceed with notice to proceed to NB to complete that Blue Water or that Eagle Cliff Cold Bay connection until the Cold Bay Water Treatment Plant is fully operational, which it's not yet. It's operating, but not at full capacity. We are expecting that there will be additional project costs due to the delay in issuing this notice to proceed to the contractor. I've reached out to them to get a better handle on what those costs are expected to be. I haven't got a firm answer, and the reason they gave is that their suppliers for materials that are coming from the US weren't committing to any firm numbers until the uncertainty regarding the impending tariffs is resolved or are resolved. And so we are expecting additional costs as a result of this delay. We just don't know at this point what those costs would be. So in terms of the capital projects in Eagle Cliff, talked about the Eagle Cliff Cold Bay connection. The other related project would be decommissioning the dam at the Cardinal Creek Reservoir. Currently, there's a dam safety concern due to the significant amount of leakage coming through the dam. So it should, once the connection is complete to Cove Bay, that dam should be decommissioned. That would essentially be removing the dam and reducing, lowering the lake level or pond level down to what it was prior to the dam being constructed. There's currently just a $200,000 budget placeholder for that. The details of that project haven't yet been developed. Another capital project that needs to be implemented that really should be done this year is replacement of the pressure reducing valve at Bannister Road, and that's not functioning properly. And a $50,000 budget allowance is included for completing that project to make sure that the system functions properly.
Thank you. So given this uncertainty around the whole water treatment plant connection, we're really only able to with any kind of certainty, prepare a financial plan kind of 1 year at a time. Everything in our budget for years 2 to 5 is uncertain. The water treatment plant is still not fully functional, and the capital project has not proceeded, to date has not proceeded. So the planning assumptions included in this budget is that the project will proceed as planned during this year. And once construction begins and we have some more certainty around that, we'll be able to look at future options for operational and capital financing. Consideration, we need to give consideration to operating the two systems either independently or as a combined local service area. Operating them, Cove Bay and Eagle Cliff as a combined, like a merged local service area, does require an assent process. We would need to go and obtain assent of the electors in both the Cove Bay local service area and the Eagle Cliff local service area. Alternatively, without that agreement, the two systems could operate on a standalone model. Effectively, Eagle Cliff would be purchasing water from the Cove Bay water users. And this is the model that has been in place in Blue Water Park for more than a decade now. Eagle Cliff missed its revenue target in 2024 by about $10,000. We did have some unusual income from a new subdivision that was added, and we collected funds from each lot to join the system. So this amount was unexpected. We had not included it in the 2024 budget, and those money has been contributed to the Eagle Cliff Reserve. So this year we are contemplating changes to the rate structure. And we've adjusted our target revenue down from 94,500 to 90,000, which we believe is a more conservative and achievable estimate. And we are taking a three-pronged approach in order to achieve that revenue target. We're planning on increasing the annual flat rate. We are planning on implementing a model which charges metered rates from the very first gallon of water used, which is again the same model that's in place in the 4 West Side systems and now the Cove Bay system. And lastly, we are going to add progressive increases to the variable rates. So doing some analysis on the revenue collections, our plan is to increase the flat rate from 630 to 655. That's a $25 increase to the flat rate. We believe that that will increase the annual revenue by about $2,775. And adding a new tier 0 is what we're going to call it. And charging a consumption charge for the very first gallon of water used would add approximately $1,868 annually to the revenue budget, and then increasing progressively, increasing annual increases to each of the remaining 4 rates will add additional revenue. So our total potential increase, this is if consumption year over year stayed exactly the same as what it was last year, which we know isn't always the case, but it's our best guess at estimating what the revenue will be next year. That is, and under those assumptions, that is sufficient additional revenue in order to meet the revenue target of $90,000 per year. Okay, so on the operations side of the Eagle Cliff budget, again, nothing extraordinary from an operations perspective. We will include the share to Eagle Cliff of a 1 new position. The budget includes an annual payment of interest and principal. This is for the $820,000, assuming we do go ahead and borrow that money. So by doing it similar to the Tunstall Bay method, we only have 5 years that we can hold that debt for, but if we keep it in sort of a line of credit style of debt, it allows us to make larger principal payments. If we don't lock it into long-term debt and we keep it into short-term, we benefit when, as the principal balance comes down, we benefit by reduced interest costs, and we benefit by having the flexibility in order to repay amounts of principal at our leisure instead of being locked into fixed annual interest and principal payments, which over the longer term will tend to pay a lot more interest. So the importance of that is because if the project proceeds and if we're able to connect new properties that I'm going to call them the in-between properties. So those are properties that are outside of the Eagle Cliff local service area and outside of the Cove Bay, they're in between the 2 local service areas. If we're able to connect some of those properties that would benefit from this new infrastructure running in front of their home, then the amount of debt principal could be directly reduced by payments that would be charged to those new additional properties coming on the water system. Now, as Patrick mentioned, the amount, we would determine that amount, how much those additional new benefiting properties would be charged. That would be based on what's the final construction costs for this project are known. But we won't be permitting additional connections until such time as the capacity of the new plant, once it's fully operational, has been assessed. And we have to ensure that the plant is delivering the amount of treated water that was promised before we can begin adding additional connections in between the 2 local service areas. In the capital plan, We've added the cost for the water main interconnection project to Cove Bay. So the estimated project cost there is just over 2 million. It's funded 1.2 million through through the grant. And it's funded 820,000 through Eagle Cliff debt. Our 2025 capital plan also includes a provision to replace the pressure reducing valve on Bannister Road. And it includes kind of a semi-annual provision for pumps, equipment, failure, contingent money for any kind of equipment failure in 2027 and 2029. And we just kind of move those forward each year to make sure we have something in the budget. We are unsure, but wanted to just put it in there to signal that some work needs to be done to remediate the dam once the project is complete. So I've just popped it in there for 2029 and used Patrick's order of magnitude of $200,000 in order to fund that. Any questions related to Eagle Cliff?
So there was one online, which is around the potential delay of the system. So what will happen if the contractor is ready to move over to the Eagle Cliff phase of work, but the Cove Bay plant is not yet operational, which is effectively where we're at right now and what we're teetering on. And so the way that the notice of borrowing was structured by council was that based on the feedback we heard from Eagle Cliff residents and the challenges being experienced with the Cove Bay water treatment plant was that the decision was made not to draw down on any of the borrowing until the Cove Bay water treatment plant was fully operational. To mitigate the risk of what would happen if it wasn't operational and Eagle Cliff residents were on the hook to begin paying for and paying down the loan for something that wasn't operational. And so that's the decision point where council is right now, and where I believe the Eagle Cliff community is right now, is that risk has come to pass, that the Cove Bay water treatment plant remains a beleaguered project with issues of the filters. Can you scroll back on the slideshow to the picture of the filters there? Because I think it might be helpful to explain for Eagle Cliff residents that are watching this what is actually going on with the system. One back, I think. A little more back.
The very beginning.
Yeah, it was in the Cove Bay presentation right at the beginning
Oh,
with the cuff system that was open showing the filters.
okay, all the way back.
Yeah,
On the picture.
yeah. Just to really understand what's going on here, and I'll try and give a layperson's view, and I'll look to the director of engineering to signal me if I'm totally off and something's incorrect and I'm not communicating it well. But what you see in the picture here is the actual water treatment unit called the cuff unit that is open. And those cylinders in there represent individual ceramic filter units that are put in the system. And those are the things that actually do the filter the water. So there's two of these bigger units in the water treatment plant, all that have filters in them. And what the Public Works Department is working through, as well as the equipment supplier, is that some unknown number of those filters, which are acquired and procured through a third party, are faulty. And we can't get at which ones are faulty through visual inspection. And there's been lots of back and forth with the equipment provider to try and rectify that. And that's what's going on now. And my understanding is that Purifics, who is the equipment supplier, is coming out with a custom sort of made unit that can test each of these filters individually. Now, the benefit of using these filters is that I believe, they're spec'd to last about 20 years, if I'm correct. Like there's a 20-year warranty on them.
10-year warranty.
10-year warranty. So they don't get replaced regularly. And once they're in the system is effectively a closed loop system that just works when it's supposed to be working. So staff right now are working through the ceramic issue piece here in terms of the water quality. And as you can see from this slide is that the water quality right now, even despite some of those filters not working, is substantially improved, but it's still not meeting VCH requirements. So it's actually filtering things out and it's filtering them better than the previous system, but it's not meeting its specified target quality. The secondary issue is that the plant, as you can see on the slide here, it's not achieving the rated capacity yet. So we haven't had both of these big water purifying systems in service, fully functioning. And as a result, we're not seeing the quantity of water that the system is supposed to be pushing through be achieved yet. So there's both a quality issue and a quantity issue that's being worked through. In terms of an overall timeline of when this is going to be rectified or fixed, the best answer is that we're not sure. So this has been an ongoing issue for a few years now. It feels like it is down in the itty bitty details, but there's still an uncertain reality of whether this system itself is going to be able to meet its specified quality as well as its specified flow. And that is a big question mark that's up in the air that is standing in the way of this system being fully commissioned by Vancouver Coastal Health. So that's the Cove Bay water treatment plant system and where it is now. I'll give you time to go back to where we were in the slideshow and just talk about the Eagle Cliff portion for a second. So the risk to the Eagle Cliff system is that there's still a risk that the overall system might not be fully functional or might not be able to be fully commissioned because there's a big question mark on. So in terms of contracting NB to advance the work, it's something that still could be done, but there's the big question of whether we want residents to be paying for a loan towards connecting a system that doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, you know, and if it's just at the end of the day, we have to abandon the system and move into something new, that's going to be a multi-year time horizon that puts Eagle Cliff residents on the hook. So this is relatively recent developments and recent conversations that council is having, looking at a way forward. I'm just looking at the chat here. Okay, so Annette is in the chat talking about some of the specifics, just around the number of connections. But it's a decision point that we're going to be soliciting some feedback from Eagle Cliff residents. This is the first time that we've, you know, really laid it out for the public what we are and what the risks are. And we'll have to decide, local service area will have to decide whether it does want to borrow the money or whether it is still wants us to advance with the course that we have of we're not going to put money into this improvement until the water treatment plant is fully functioning. Anything else that you know, I'll look to the director of engineering here if that captured it or if there's pieces that we want to add or modify.
I think that captures it pretty well. There was a question that just came up with the chat that's related to that.
Yeah, so to Glenn asking if the contractors were put on pause, would they honor the quote that they provided? There likely would be a cost escalation for the delay. It's uncertain as to how much that would be. There are options on the table that we could just retender that portion of the project. We could look at what the contractor you know, would provide, how much that escalation is. We're not entirely certain yet. There was also questions of what are our contractual obligations to that contract, to NB as the contractor, as well as what are the obligations for the equipment supplier of the water treatment plant, given these delays and given that these delays are pushing the municipality into financial risk. So those are the questions that are being worked through now, but I would expect that there would be some sort of escalation to the Eagle Cliff project if there was a delay.
Is the pipe made here in Canada or is it going to have to come from the state?
I believe there's two types of pipe that are installed as part of this project. Some of it is ductile iron. And I believe their supplier, NB supplier for that pipe is from the US. And that's one of the main issues, is that they based their quote or their tender submission on a price from the supplier that they gave us a deadline for giving them a notice to proceed, that, prior to that, they would honor the price. And since we passed that deadline, now they're saying, well,
And the US dollar is not strong right now, it's
we've got
dropped
these
and.
potentially impending tariffs. We're
Yeah.
not sure what the price escalation is gonna be, but there will be some.
So it's got a dollar they're gonna put in. And whether it's available in Canada or not, we don't know.
Well, I mean, that's another option that, we could explore is, could we look at potentially revising some of the design using, using a different pipe material or a different pipe supplier that doesn't come from the US.
Councillor Getty.
You mentioned that, the issue of capacity and the, inclusion of the middle group of people, users in terms of hookups and everything. So are these budget estimates, worst case or best case in terms of, let's assume that we get both cuff units up and running and they don't meet the capacity, then, and we can't hook these people up right away, we have another separate issue, an ongoing issue with respect to capacity, then, do these budget numbers include them?
No, it assumes no additional revenue from properties in between.
Well, that would, if it does reach capacity and we do get those, people agreeing to hook up, then that would be bonus to this budget.
Yeah, it would be a new revenue item, which would reduce the amount that Eagle Cliff residents ultimately have to repay on the loan.
Good, thank you.
Councillor Morse.
I assumed all along that the capacity issue isn't to meet adding Eagle Cliff or the bit of Grafton Lands that's already done, but adding the rest of Grafton Lands and any other future expansion in the cove for Parkview Slopes or something like that. If it's up and running, it's excess capacity down the road, not current capacity. When you say that won't meet capacity.
Well, capacity, we based the plans to connect Eagle Cliff on, a rated capacity of the system that we were purchasing, that we have purchased. Obviously not assuming that we're gonna need that entire capacity, but, at this point, we haven't been able to push through the amount of water that we're supposed to be able to push through the system. So it does raise questions about, the viability of the Eagle Cliff connection
Or the rest of the Grafton Lands.
or the rest of the Grafton.
So at this point, the capacity it's meeting is just bay capacity, the existing system, existing users.
No, it's a bit higher than that. But based on what we've been able to, and we're only running with one filter, and so extrapolating that to two is making some assumptions about, how that's gonna work, which may not hold up, it may be better than that. But based on what we've seen with one filter, looking at peak day demand in the summertime for both current system and Eagle Cliff, it's really pushing up against that, the limit of what we're able to produce right now, what we've seen so far in the system. So that's not a very comfortable position to be in, because then you don't have capacity for anything else.
Sorry, I asked the question.
Then a question for the CFO. Will the current Eagle Cliff parcel tax of $500 be eliminated once the connection is made?
It will remain in place until such time that the debt is repaid, at least. And then if there's a question, is the model going to continue as two separate standalone systems? Would it be combined? The future, what the future model for Hope Bay Eagle Cliff looks like is just, there's so many different variables in the air. For the time being, with the debt in place, that parcel tax will certainly stay in place.
Okay. Tricky system right now. And, I would offer that, if there is a, conversation on the governance of the system and both Cove Bay and Eagle Cliff coming together, we would certainly be doing some outreach and engagement in very public ways with the residents of both of those systems to figure out the path going forward and to, just make sure that what we're doing is working for residents. Moving on.
Thank you. Moving on to the west side systems, so Bowen Bay, King Edward Bay, and Blue Water Park, and we can really talk about these three systems. Elements of them are kind of standalone, elements of them are combined, so I saved it till the end and thought perhaps we should just kind of deal with them all together. So start with Blue Water, Patrick.
Okay, so we've got two major projects that are currently underway. The first one is looking at connecting these three systems in that the highly productive Bowen Bay wells, the well pumps would be upgraded, connected up to the existing King Edward Bay treatment shed, where it would tie into a line that runs up to the King Edward Bay reservoir. So then all of the well pumps from Bowen Bay and King Edward Bay would be pumping up to the King Edward Bay reservoir, and from there, water would be supplied to all three systems. The real driver for that project is the water supply issues in Blue Water. Blue Water was requiring water from King Edward Bay in the summer months. It was getting to the point where the King Edward Bay wells were being strained. There was concern about potentially long-term damage to those wells. And so bringing the Bowen Bay wells online to provide that supply, that additional supply, would provide enough water for all three systems for their current demands and their expected future demands. So to date, the fill line has been installed from the Bowen Bay well 1 and 2 shed up to the King Edward Bay shed. Overall, the project, I would say, is about 40% complete. There is a connection between an existing connection between there's the shed where the wells 1 and 2 are in Bowen Bay, and then well 3 shed is up near the reservoir tanks. Further investigations have confirmed that existing line is not going to be adequate for the new higher pressure well pump installed at well 3. And so a new replacement line is going to need to be added. So there are some additional costs associated with that. We have looked at project savings within the water distribution system replacement project, which is really coming from the same pot of borrowed money, as well as the project contingencies that we have in place. And so we're able to accommodate that additional cost within those existing budgets that include those contingencies. The other major project that's underway is replacing a large part of the water distribution system in Blue Water. So far, about 42% of the new water mains have been installed, and about 30% of the service connections have been installed. The target completion for both of these projects is in May of 2025. And we've got a $700,000 budget for the interconnection project, $2,750,000 budget for the water distribution system placement project. And those are primarily debt funded. Other upcoming projects in Blue Water in terms of the system needs. I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Tunstall Bay system about the GARP assessments on the wells. So we also need to add UV treatment for the Blue Water wells that are up near Reservoir Tank in Blue Water. And so we've got a $50,000 budget allocated to that. Not this year because of other obvious budget pressures on the system, but that is something that is required by Vancouver Coastal Health and will need to be added into a future year budget. We also have to add UV treatment at the King Edward Bay treatment shed. So that would capture the lower King Edward Bay wells as well as the Bowen Bay wells. We did get, we budgeted a price that was based on pricing we obtained from NB Contracting. We are looking at alternative designs and pricing from a different contractor and do expect those costs to be lower. But in terms of budgeting and carrying a price that we know we'd be able to achieve, we've budgeted $225,000 for that. Adding UV treatment at the King Edward Bay shed. That would be a shared cost between the three systems because the water being treated would be supplied to all three systems. So that's those are the capital projects got underway and in the future. Okay, and then in terms of Bowen Bay, I mentioned, I talked earlier about the system interconnection project. Bowen Bay system would be making it's primarily funded by Blue Water because the driver for the project is to fill the supply gap, the water supply gap in Blue Water. There is a contribution to that project that is being made by the Bowen Bay system because we need to account for the value of replacing older well pumps that are nearing the end of their life with brand new well pumps. And as I mentioned, Bowen Bay would be making a contribution to this UV installation in the King Edward Bay shed. If we weren't doing that interconnection project, we would have to install UV treatment at Bowen Bay well treatment shed. So because we're doing the interconnection project, we don't have to do that. It's in a common location. The other big project that's on the horizon with Bowen Bay is eventual replacement of the water distribution system. The mains in Bowen Bay are all typically 4-inch or smaller. They're undersized for fire protection and they're approximately 55 years old. So we're looking at potentially a $2 million ballpark project to replace that water distribution system. We need to, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Cove Bay system, we need to develop a long-range asset management plan and capital replacement plan for these water systems. And that's particularly important for Bowen Bay and looking at how we would plan and budget for this distribution system replacement. So that's Bowen Bay. King Edward Bay, we don't really have any projects planned other than the ones we've talked about, being a cost share of that UV treatment added to King Edward Bay treatment shed. That UV treatment would have to be added there regardless of whether these projects were happening or not. So it would be a system cost. Now it's being shared amongst three systems. And so there's some efficiency there.
Okay. So for these three systems, we are recommending that the hybrid user rate, the flat rate plus the metered rate charges, which were brought in 2024, remains in place in all three districts. Again, this is the same rate that's in place in Tunstall Bay Water local service area. So that's 4 of 7 water districts on the exact same hybrid flat rate consumption rate. This year, we are recommending that the use of parcel taxes be considered when needing to augment contributions to reserve funds where necessary. And the benefit of that, just one more time, is that parcel taxes can be deferred, and they really work well in local service areas that are predominantly residential. So if all of the properties are single family residential, they all have a $200 parcel tax on it. It's a very equitable way to distribute the need to collect additional revenue. Just going over the proposed annual increase for each of the three districts is a 5% increase to the flat rate and 5% increase to the variable rate as well in each year of the financial plan. We were able to achieve our target revenues in all three of the West Side water districts in 2024. We did actually have an additional collection of a flat rate $100 per property in these three districts in 2024, which was to address the uncertainty of revenue collection given the transitioning to this kind of mid-year implementation of the hybrid metered rate. So you can just kind of see there between the three districts, their budget actual revenue collections were higher in each of the three water systems. It is expected that by implementing the recommended user rate for 2025, that we will yield sufficient revenue to cover operations and contributions to reserve funds in each of the water districts. So in Bowen Bay, actual revenue for 2024 was 89. We're only establishing a budget target rate of 91,847 for 2025. So we see with that 5% increase that is that 91,847 is doable. Blue Water Park, this year, Blue Water Park residents are paying a parcel tax of $550 for connected properties and $330 for unconnected properties. And this parcel tax for now is being used to service the interim debt during construction. So last year we did draw down on that authorized $3 million of Blue Water debt. We did draw down $500,000. And their budget does include interest payments for those draws and additional draws as the project progresses. So the parcel tax is right now is $550 for connected and $330 for unconnected. But once the project is finalized and all of the known costs are in, that debt will be converted to a long-term debenture debt. So once that debt becomes locked in a long-term bond issue, there are requirements to pay fixed annual interest payments and fixed annual principal payments. And we will need to raise the parcel tax from $550 to approximately $1,275 per year. It is going to be based on the interest rate in effect at the time of lock-in, but we definitely want to take advantage of the floating rates of interest that allow us to pay down additional amounts of principal, so that ultimately we hope that we won't be locking in for the full 3.1 million. Ultimately, if we can manage to repay some of that principal before we lock it in, that will save the residents' interest expense over the long term. So in King Edward Bay, they do have some unique challenges there, as the areas are not fully built out. Full build out of the different phases of the development do take some time. And there are a significant number of properties that are part of the water district, yet they remain undeveloped. So I think this year, King Edward Bay has 65 properties and only 43 or 44 of them are actually developed. So there's about a third of them that are still vacant properties. And these properties pay only the unconnected rates. They don't pay meter rates and they don't pay the full flat rate. So that poses a revenue challenge for the King Edward Bay Water District. And prior to construction of this Bowen Bay Well Upgrade project, Blue Water Park would make an annual contribution to the King Edward Bay local service area in order to compensate the King Edward Bay local service area for use of their wells. And we would calculate this contribution each year. And effectively what we did was transfer a proportionate share of the operating costs and budgeted reserve fund contributions from King Edward Bay into Blue Water Park. And that was based on Blue Water's proportionate usage of total water produced in King Edward Bay. So in 2024, that transfer from Blue Water into King Edward Bay was just over $45,000, and it's been in this range for several years now. So this relationship has been mutually beneficial to users in both districts. So Blue Water residents have benefited from having the access to King Edward Bay's water, and King Edward Bay's residents have also benefited from additional revenue, which has kept the rates affordable for the for the residents in that water district, despite having this high proportion of unconnected properties. So with the completion of this new well upgrade project, we need to develop a new cost sharing model. And the Blue Water Park residents now are paying for the upgrade, which will be available to all users in all 3 of the local service areas. But going forward, Blue Water users are going to need to continue to contribute to the incremental costs of operating through by allocating some of the variable operating costs from King Edward Bay and Bowen Bay to Blue Water Park. So what I'm working on and what we are working on and bringing to council for this year is going to be a new West Side cost sharing policy. And it will be developed for council consideration before the year end. And this policy, the intent is to set out which costs are driven by the volume of water produced. So right now it looks like hydro and chlorine are the costs that are variable and are directly related to the volume of water that's produced. So setting out a formula then to distribute or to redistribute the costs of hydro and chlorine from the to the Blue Water residents from the King Edward Bay and Bowen Bay residents based on the water consumed in each of the 3 areas. The policy will also need to identify the shared assets that were going to be benefiting all users in each of the 3 local service areas. So what we've done to begin with is we've established, or we will be bringing forth an establishment bylaw called a new shared West Side Water Reserve Fund. And it's proposed that contributions to this fund will be made annually according to the proportionate formula established by this policy. So if we look at the total properties in the 3 West Side districts, they total 280. So Blue Water Park represents 153 of those properties. In order to generate an annual contribution of $100,000 into that fund, Blue Water Park residents would be paying $55,000, and so on for the remaining districts. King Edward Bay, Bowen Bay, each would be making a contribution of about $22,000, $23,000 in order to achieve an annual contribution of $100,000 into that fund. So this fund then is going to be used to pay for the ongoing costs to maintain, replace, and construct the assets that serve the interests of the residents in all 3 properties. Looking at King Edward Bay, in order to address the revenue shortfall that will be apparent, given that this significant transfer of $45,000 per year will not be made from Blue Water Park into King Edward Bay anymore. There's going to be a need to generate additional revenue in King Edward Bay until such time as that water district becomes fully developed or close to fully developed. So we are recommending that a new parcel tax be imposed for King Edward Bay users in order to increase the revenue in that district. And as the undeveloped lots are built out and the properties begin to pay the full user rate, this revenue is going to increase, and we can review this parcel tax each year based on the number of built out properties. So we're recommending a parcel tax for King Edward Bay. We establish it at $200 for connected properties, and at 60%, that would mean $120 per year for unconnected properties. The new parcel taxes are required to go through a review panel process where the people subject to this parcel tax are authenticated before being imposed for the first time. So I believe there's a report coming to council soon to recommend that council set the date for 4 p.m. on April 24th. King Edward Bay operating budget also includes its proportionate share of the new 1.0 FTE utility operator. And you can see here where we are looking at planning for contributions to two separate reserve funds. So one will be King Edward Bay's own surplus and reserve funds, as well as an annual contribution to this new shared reserve fund. Same for the operations budget for Bowen Bay. Again, we've got the same proportionate share of the new utility operator position and separate and distinct contributions to Bowen Bay's own reserves, which are going to fund the future capital projects related to water mains and those assets within Bowen Bay, as well as a contribution, a dedicated contribution to this new shared reserve, which will fund the capital costs and replacement and renewal costs related to the shared well assets. Blue Water Park, same thing, allocation of the utility operator and dedicated contributions to its own reserves, as well as dedicated contributions to this new shared reserve. We do have in Bowen Bay, we are providing for the potential of up to $400,000 of general fund money, which may be needed in order to complete the entire Blue Water Park upgrade. This would be treated as an internal loan, and we are recommending that this internal loan be proposed to repay to the general fund over a 10-year period, and that would be added starting in 2026. So you can see the increase to the transfers to general fund, and that's what's driving that if we do have to use up to $400,000 to complete the project. In the King Edward Bay capital budget, there is the $225,000 proposed expenditure to construct the new UV filtering to protect against the groundwater pathogen risk. And this would be built utilizing funds that were drawn from this new shared West Side Reserve Fund. Just taking a look at what the plan is for this West Side Reserve Fund, you'll see it not in any of the books of the local service areas. You'll actually see it as a statutory reserve sitting with the general fund. So the plan is to hold this shared West Side Reserve Fund as a statutory reserve of the general fund. And with $100,000 contribution each year, starting in 2025, that is equitably funded by each of the 3 water districts. There would be sufficient money in there in 2027 to go ahead and move forward with this UV project for the shared well water being stored in the reserve in King Edward Bay. We anticipate that the construction of the well upgrades and the water replacement will be complete in 2025. And we've added an allowance in 2026 in the Blue Water Park budget to install its own UV treatment for its wells that are not shared infrastructure, that we estimated a cost of approximately $50,000. And that would be funded by the Blue Water Park's own reserves. And $40,000, Patrick mentioned there is an allowance or a provision of $40,000 of this project that's ongoing now to be paid for by the Bowen Bay users out of their reserve fund in order to pay for that portion of the project, which benefits the Bowen Bay users directly. So I'm happy to pause for any questions regarding to Westside.
Looking around the table at all for questions. Start with one online first. Will the upgrades required for the Blue Water Park UV treatment be a shared cost as well? And if not, why not?
As Kristen mentioned, that we funded from water reserves, because those wells providing water directly to water users only. And not providing shared water. Other wells are, which is a shared cost. in the systems.
Councillor Getty, followed by Councillor Morse.
You commented that there's potential for up to 400,000 of money from the general fund to complete the Blue Water project, Blue Water Park upgrade. So that's different from the capital projects of the UV treatment at the reservoir tank, and that was just Blue Water Park, that was 50,000. So where does that 400,000 come in? That's the pipes that are going in now?
It is the water main and well upgrades that are taking place right now. And
I thought that was all funded by.
it's funded by debt.
Yeah.
And it's also potentially funded by an internal borrowing. So if you see on this slide here, in 2025, we have up to $400,000 being transferred in from the general fund. And that was an allocation of the Growing Communities Fund that was made by council and set aside as a contingency to address any additional project costs that needed to be funded within this waterworks project. So if the full 400,000 is used, we're proposing that it be repaid over a 10-year period.
I thought there was some discussion that we, and there was a comment not too long ago that, Mayor Levin, you had made in terms of how council had decided that we weren't going to be using, general funds to, support it. And if we made that decision in Blue Water, then we, would have to make the same decision, or we were bound by that in terms of Cove Bay water. So,
Yeah, so the discussion at council at the time, so the $400,000 is being allocated into the Growing Community Fund. And the discussion from council at the time was whether to apply that money that was received as a grant, one-time grant from the province, as a grant to the local service area out of the general fund, or whether it was to be treated like a loan, which would be repaid back to the general fund. So the reasoning being that from my recollection of the discussion at council at the time was that the LSA expenses should be wholly funded by the LSA, which is why it's being treated as a loan instead of needing to go to additional borrowings. So it's not being it's being set up as an internal loan, so it's not being given out of the general fund.
so it gets tied up, but it doesn't get gifted.
That's right. Councillor Morse, and then we have Mike Rushton with his hand up on the line.
I just have I'm looking at the map for King Edward Bay. And I guess I thought the water tank was visible from Windjammer Road.
It's not visible from here.
So there is only one water tank and it's way up the hill? Because I thought Arbutus Bay had to put in a tank when they drilled their new well.
They have proposed a tank for their fourth phase, but they haven't built a new tank.
So the building you can see from the road is just the treatment.
There's the treatment shed is next to General Road. I don't believe you can see the tank from.
Well, yeah, I thought I could see the tank. It was way up the road and I thought they'd have to put in another one with the Arbutus Ridge phase 2, so that's where the tank is. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rushton, I see your hand up online. Were you looking to ask a question?
Yeah, I'm just going to comment on. I didn't hear very clearly what Patrick said in response to my question in the chat, but it seems to me that when we combine water supplies from 3 sources now into what essentially is a single system, it's very difficult to distinguish between where the water's coming from for any given user. So it just seems unfair that the Blue Water Park UV treatment upgrade shouldn't be shared amongst the three areas. It just seems like a very minor point to be quibbling over. Maybe we should just all get on with it, because I can't tell whether a molecule of water I get comes from Blue Water Park or Bowen Bay or King Edward Bay when it's all finished.
Yeah, you raise a good point, and I see Rob's made some comments in the chat as well around that. And you're right. Even though water from the Blue Water wells, we don't actually see water going back to King Edward Bay, like back to the other systems from Blue Water. So the water is consumed from those wells, is consumed in Blue Water. It does reduce the amount of water that gets drawn from the shared resource. And so if we're setting up this shared fund to be prorated based on number of connections, which is what Kristen has presented, then I do see your point, and you know, I think we have to reconsider that definition of what we consider to be shared infrastructure, and maybe talk to Kristen further after this meeting about how we frame that Blue Water well situation with respect to, you know, being part of the, even though it's only supplying water to one system, it is part of the overall water supply for the combined system, as you mentioned. We'll reconsider that.
Thank you.
Follow up?
Yeah, I'm just gonna, Mr. Rushton, did that answer your question, or is there any follow-up that you had?
No, that did answer my question, and I thank Patrick for reconsidering that position.
Thank you. Over to you, Councillor Morse.
At this point, there is no way for that water to flow from Blue Water to King Edward Bay or Bowen Bay, correct?
For Blue Water?
For the Blue Water well, water to flow into the King Edward Bay storage tank or to the other two systems.
Yeah, we don't ever see water flowing that way, like flowing from Blue Water to King Edward Bay. I guess technically, if you know everything was shut off in King Edward Bay and Bowen Bay, you know, you would get water flowing. It could flow that direction, but we just haven't seen that.
So the
That
pipe it
circumstance.
would just run down the pipe,
Well,
or you don't
gets
need to put a
consumed.
connection line in, I guess is what I'm getting at, like you're doing with Bowen Bay.
There is a connection between those systems. It just gets consumed in Blue Water. It doesn't make it, you know, it doesn't make its way backwards.
But I thought with the Bowen Bay discussion, there was discussion about putting the line in from the Bowen Bay wells to feed to the King Edward Bay tank, but also at some point putting a line in the other way to feed to Bowen Bay so that it would have the adequate water supply for fire.
I'm sorry, I don't quite follow.
I thought at this point, we're only connecting Bowen Bay's wells to the King Edward Bay tank.
Yes,
And there's no line that would come backwards the other way to feed the fire hydrant water lines. for
there is a
firefighting.
connection between King Edward Bay and Bowen Bay. There's an existing connection. So water does, you know, if we're supplying, if Bowen Bay doesn't have its own supply coming from their tank, it will draw water from King Edward Bay and ultimately from the King Edward Bay.
And is it a
tank.
different line or the same supply line? Never mind, we can confer that offline. I'll dig back the old report.
Councillor Getty.
That was my question. Just, we're talking about the possibility of a budget item 2 years down the road, and we've got time to reconsider and think about what the allocation would be for when that budget comes up. With that $50,000 for the UV treatment of the Blue Water Park.
It will be governed by the policy, and the policy needs to be done before the end of the year. So once we have the policy in place, then that will dictate how we're cost sharing for that piece of infrastructure.
There's more time in the future to talk about what that policy is.
Yeah.
Not seeing any further questions, so I believe we can move on.
Clarification.
Our last
Oh,
one.
we have,
The 400,000 loan from the general fund to Blue Water. That's the only general fund, interfund loan besides the one we already have for Cove Bay
Uh,
that's being proposed.
well, no, there was one for Tunstall, a little 1-year bridging loan.
Just worried about depleting our available unappropriated surplus.
We will talk about Snug Cove sewer.
Did have some slides for this, but they would get incorporated, so I'll just go through them. The main capital project that we have in the Snug Cove sewer system is the replacement of the marine outfall. There's been multiple failures of that outfall. And the most recent one resulted in the outfall being truncated about 2/3 of the way to its former terminus. So as a result, we're currently not in compliance with our permit to discharge, which, has the expectation of discharge at a certain location, which is no longer occurring. So there is some urgency to getting this new outfall installed. A detailed design and permitting, the permitting processes, there's a number of them are fairly extensive and time consuming. That's all underway. There's a budget amount of 1.2 million for that project. There is potentially some grant funding that could cover part of that cost, which I'll talk about shortly. But the intent would be to start that project in 2025, unless we get into some issues with the timelines around that potential grant funding. So another project that we're looking at implementing in 2025 would be an inflow and infiltration reduction program. So that would be surface water or groundwater getting into the sewer collection system and then contributing to problems with the capacity of the water treatment plant. So reducing I&I, that would improve operations and reduce the risk of exceeding our discharge permit limits. And possibly it could enable additional connections to the system. But further work would need to be conducted to confirm that, whether that's the case or not. There is some grant funding potentially available to fund this through the Housing Accelerator Fund grants. And so, but we're looking at 150,000 that could potentially be grant funded to start this year. And then the other big project, of course, that on the horizon is the need to upgrade the wastewater treatment plant in order to accommodate any new growth. Of course, we've had since 2022 a moratorium building permits in the service area that would add a load to the plant. So we did do a pre-design for these upgrades in 2022, and then the phase 1 of the upgrades was completed in 2023, and that was really to reduce the risk of exceeding our permit to discharge. To add any new capacity to the system would require phase 2 of these upgrades, which would be adding new bioreactors, pump station, and then expansions to the control room and lower the wastewater treatment plant. So these are big costs. We've got an estimated in 2026 dollars, escalated $2026, estimated $8.6 million capital project. There is a potential funding source through Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada that could fund up to 50% of this. There is the opportunity to potentially stack other grant funding on top of that. But the funding source could be municipal contributions, sir. So it's a big project and it's unclear how it will be funded. Those are the capital sources.
Okay. So in line with many of the other water systems, the Snug Cove user rate revenue is set to increase each year by 4%. And that will be in place until such time that the internal loan to the general fund for the Snug Cove users' share of the wastewater treatment plant upgrade in 2022 is paid off. And that internal loan will be fully paid off in 2028. Additionally, I do have a plan to modify the rate structure a little bit. The way the sewer is distributed amongst all users now is strictly on a volumetric method. So all connected properties pay their pro rata share based on the water consumption used in any given billing period. So if we plan to add a flat rate component, and I'm recommending, say $150 per period, that will mean that all connected properties pay something towards the sewer costs of the sewer each period, regardless of the amount of water used. So what we do have right now is every billing period will have a small number of properties, maybe where the property owner has gone away for a significant amount of time or just water use is so low that the amount of sewer charges attributed to that property are so small. So if we implement a flat rate minimum charge, it does ensure that at least every property pays a minimum contribution each period. And that is reflective of the fact that the fixed costs to operate a sewer treatment plant are so incredibly high that everybody should be paying something towards that each billing period. So I just wanted to take a look at the internal loan and where we're at with that. The total cost of the sewer treatment plant upgrade came to $1.74 million, and that was fully costed out in 2023. And per council direction was to assign 43.8% of that infrastructure investment to the actual users within the sewer fund. So $762,000 was needed to be reclaimed back from the users in the sewer through an internal short-term loan. So we have collected back payments from 2023, 2022, and 2024. And that leaves an outstanding balance owing to the general fund of $445,427. So that will be repaid over the remaining 4 years of the length of the loan each year in 2025 to 2028. And once that annual repayment is eliminated, that will free up quite a bit of room in the Snug Cove sewer budget. In order to pay that and to collect additional revenue needed in the local sewer, in the local service area, connected users do pay an annual parcel tax of $850 per property. So this parcel tax, that will stay in place. And once the internal annual loan is repaid, what that does is create sufficient room in the budget in order to manage the principal and interest costs attributable to this new sewer treatment outfall project that's estimated to cost $1.2 million. So what we don't see is a need to rapidly increase that parcel tax once the new debt is in place. We kind of see an ability to transfer the servicing capacity from this existing internal loan to the new external loan in a couple of years. That loan is going to be It will have to be rolled into long-term debt and it'll have an amortization period of 20 years, so it will be in place for some time. The budget includes, in 2026, it includes a provision for short-term interest on the sewer outfall project of $48,000. And then that debt will be locked in. It will be annual interest and principal payments for the $1.2 million will attract annual interest and principal payments of about $92,000 per year once that is converted. So we are having conversations with Housing Infrastructure Grant Canada to authorize us to use up to perhaps $100,000 of Housing Accelerator grant funds in order to pay for the incremental cost to upsize that sewer outfall pipe. So the additional cost needed to size the pipe to fit the needs of the 20-year population growth estimates is about another $100,000. So there are different methods to try and raise the funds to collect that. One is something known as a latecomer agreement that is established. It means that all future connectors need to pay a portion of something that has been established through a latecomer agreement. Now, the problem with latecomer agreements is they only have a lifespan of 15 years. And once that 15-year period expires, you can't collect that money back ever. So if we could just find a source to fund the $100,000 upsize cost off the top, that doesn't require implementing a latecomer agreement that has some risk that it may never be collected back, that would be our primary and our first preference. So we are in discussion with the grant program advisors on that. Additionally, I think Patrick mentioned it, we are looking to get approval to use $150,000 of this Housing Accelerator Fund in order to fund the inflow and infiltration program. And the primary goal of the inflow and infiltration program is to fix holes in the collection pipe that allow for stormwater infiltration. And if we can do that, we can provide additional capacity, treatment capacity, without actually doing anything else. So the expectation is that through this program, we will create additional sewer capacity, which in turn will provide additional capacity for housing units, making it an eligible expenditure for Housing Accelerator. That is the premise. An annual provision has been established just as a contingency for equipment and pump replacements in each year, 2026 through 2029. And I think that's all I have for the Snug Cove sewer budget, so I'm happy to take questions or comments. Sure.
Not seeing any around the table or online. One came in online. Asking if additional capacity is opened up from the I&I work, how will it be distributed? Will it be Hunger Games style? Prime reason by policy?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Yeah, so just in response to that question, it sounds like we're not there yet. I would presume there would be some engagement with folks in that area because there have been developments that have wanted connection and capacity. So we would do some engagement from there, and council would monitor it as well. I'd expect staff to bring forward some solutions as well.
Tim had a question.
Oh, Councillor Wake, was your hand up? Yes, go ahead. Physical hand. Apologies.
Yeah. I think this is a huge issue and it probably needs more investigation and discussion. I don't think there's much question. We need to go ahead with the sewer outfall project and with the I&I project, and the plans for funding those sound good to me. But when it comes to applying for a $5 million grant to build a $10 million wastewater treatment plant, additional wastewater treatment plant in the Cove. I think there's some real questions there about how we're going to pay for that, and those questions actually get raised in the report about what are the chances that we're actually going to be able to find enough funding to do that, and especially when we're looking at DCCs and with an unknown amount of development. And the other thing we are looking at, I understand, is the possibility for some of the areas not right in the Cove, but for example, Lot 1 and Parkview Slopes and potential developments up above. Those would need a completely new sewer line connection all the way down to the Cove if we went with the treatment plant. And I think we should be looking very closely at tertiary on-site treatment with a dispersal berm rather than having septic fields. It's a better way to go. There's definitely some hurdles to get over to do it. Some hurdles with the province, and one of those is that we would have to have an approved liquid waste management plan, and our CAO is kind of on top of this. But I just think it needs a lot more discussion, and I'm not sure we should be spending our time applying for $5 million grants that aren't really going to solve anything.
Thank you, Councillor White. I'm happy to comment on this one as well. So, because we do have it as another agenda item, we're going to talk about that, the grant application piece now, or do we want to finish with the water and sewer systems first? I'm just going to look to staff for some guidance on this.
I think we should finish with this one and deal with this next agenda item on its own.
Okay, great. So
It's not part of this
Yeah.
budget. It's not been inserted because there is so much uncertainty around it for exactly those reasons.
Right, okay. So for the sake of closing this conversation, then the, yep, I got you, Councilor Getty. There is no contemplation right now of the SNUG, just to, put it out there in public, there's no contemplation right now or plans to advance a $4 or $5 million borrowing for the Snug Cove sewer system.
Correct.
Correct, okay, great. Councilor Getty.
It's not in this financial plan draft we're looking at.
Exactly, yeah. Councilor Getty.
One of the things about the new outfall pipe was you mentioned the business about permitting and how long that took. It's time consuming and it's very expensive. And if I remember correctly, previous conversations that we've had is that if we go outside a certain limit of what the discharge volume would be, that we're getting into a whole different level of concern and supervision by the province. So the numbers that we're using in terms of the 20-year build out is that if we run into a problem with the province granting us the maximum capacity that has been considered for some substantial 20-year build out, is there room to pull that back so that we don't get into the most difficult, time consuming, costly possible denial from the province of a new permit?
So in terms of the costly process, I think you're probably talking about the registration under municipal wastewater regulation. So
You
that
don't have to tell me. Is that what I'm talking about? But- Okay,
that's
cost probably.
that gets triggered quite close to where we are at right now. So really, if we're contemplating any kind of expansion to accommodate future growth, we're going to be into that process. The only question mark was whether the province would consider this current outfall project to consider that need based on the fact that we're upsizing the pipe for the future. Our argument that we made in our submissions to the province is that we're not actually changing. We've had a moratorium on building permits. We're not adding any load to the system. So we're not required, we shouldn't be required to register under the MWR. We haven't actually gotten, their confirmation that they agree with that. We expect that we will, or that they will, but certainly any upgrades to wastewater treatment facilities capacity, part of that upgrade would be a registration of it.
That's the much bigger project. That's the next item on the agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, not seeing any further questions online or in the room. So back over to you for the next steps.
Okay, we'll just wrap it up. Thank you for sticking it through our presentation today. I just wanted to talk about from communications perspective what the next steps were. So again, this budget does contemplate a brand new parcel tax. So we would be convening a meeting of the parcel tax review panel. We'll be seeking council direction to establish a date for that soon. We will be communicating our changes to the parcel taxes and the user rates will be communicated through all of our email distribution channels, and we will advertise those in the undercurrent. And we will continue to take the opportunity to receive feedback from the public. The official close date of the feedback process is Friday, March 7th. We are here on March 3rd of the budget presentation. We will continue to officially take that feedback and present it to council on the March 24th meeting of council. There will be a revised consolidated budget draft 2, which contains all of the water and sewer budgets and all of the known changes to date for the financial plan coming to council next week. And we will be looking to adopt our final 5-year financial plan bylaws and tax rates at the meeting of April 14th and 28th. So feedback is able to be provided through the dedicated budget email at budget@bimbc.ca. It can be provided directly to Mayor and Council at mayorandcouncil@bimbc.ca. As well, there is a dedicated website community discussion board, and our activity on that board has not been very robust, so it would be kind of neat to see some additional engagement on that platform. The feedback period officially ends March 7th, and please do address letters, emails to Mayor and Council, or come and speak to council at the council meeting of March 10th or March 24th. And I think that's it.
Great, Councillor Getty.
The community discussion board, I had some people saying at my open house on Saturday that it was very, very difficult to get in. So I tried for a couple of hours yesterday to try and get in. And it didn't accept the password that I had used years ago that was registered that showed just, repeat this. And it said to get a new password, then it would send me an email. It never changed. I tried again, and it's a very, very difficult. You're not getting feedback on that way because it's not possible to get into it.
Okay.
So I recommend that unless and until that gets finished, that people use the email at budget.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I only saw one topic.
And that person came to my open house and said she wasn't even sure it got through, and it was really, really difficult.
Okay.
So, and I followed up and tried it, and it is very, very difficult
Okay, good to know.
to get in.
Right, not seeing any further questions or comments. Let's consider that received. Just looking around the room, we can go for 2 3/4 hours.
Quick break.
Folks need a 3 to 5 minute bio break.
No, I need to go into the other room and warm up.
Or the heat's not working in this room. So we'll come back here for just past 3:45.
Open the window.
Keep in mind that the
I'm just out here every day. It's interesting to have that. This is it. It's still. Just over there.
yeah, it's much easier to read understand
it all.
the landscape of the.
Yeah, yeah.
And then to have like every counselor there to understand utility budget, I think it's.
Yeah. And then we can refer to the school count because it goes back and I've been through, whatever this happens.
Yeah.
Just to, for people like me who've been watching for ages. I remember judging. What was going on.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of questions to ask. Councils too, right? Some of them. The council meetings, but it's been one council or not, it's what seeds they have.
Yeah.
They haven't gotten this.
Yeah.
Sort of taking care of.
That's right. Very good. I think it's better.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah. Why? It's right. Go on. Oh, there's nobody in here. That's a few times. Watch yourself on that. All right, we let them out and now they don't come back. I mean, everybody, like, how I go. I want to. That wasn't. Right. I think we're still alive, but I'm not.
You are still live. We don't have a nice like intermission screen.
We can play music.
Did she turn the sound off?
No, I don't think she's been back.
Like, go and find them. We let Judy out and she get her. I don't think that's fair. Oh, I think we've been 5 minutes. I want to get home with daylight. I can see about my next little meetings. Look. And we'll have a great big wind and salt spray and we'll let all dirty again, so don't blame me for weather.
Okay, did we see Councillor Getty out in
He's
the?
upstairs, apparently. Didn't hike up there. Oh, we'll have quorum. Phone's over there, so we can't text it.
Councillor Wade, can you hear us?
I can.
Okay, great. So we are back to our agenda then, as I call us back to order. 4.2 grant funding application for Snug Cove wastewater treatment plant expansion. Back over to our Director of Engineering. Although just to build on something Councillor Wake put on in the chat about the thorough and detailed reporting from our CFO and Director of Engineering and the utility systems budget. You know, I know that was a long presentation. I think it was a good presentation. Just in talking to a couple of the councillors on our break here, it was really great, I think, for council to be able to see all of the system budgets and all of the utility budgets in context and coming to us at the during budget season. It felt illuminating to me, even though the subject matter is pretty nitty gritty at times. So thank you to the work that you folks put into that and bringing that to us. I thought it was a great presentation. I'm curious to hear the feedback from the public. I think if we're able to put it out and, even on the YouTube video, if we break it up into chapters for the different systems and then send that out with direct links for residents, that might be a good way to approach it because it felt like everything was covered there. Okay. And now moving on for our second agenda item here.
Okay, we discussed earlier and council's aware of the issues with the Snug Cove wastewater treatment plant. That's something that's been an issue for years. We've been looking for grant funding. For the most part, there wasn't anything available. Something has come up through the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund, which is a fund that's whose objective is to help fund infrastructure improvements that would enable more housing. And since we do have moratorium on building permits in the Snug Cove sewer service area, as a result of infrastructure deficiency and a lack of wastewater treatment plant capacity, it does fall right under that category. There is the issue that this program is being rolled out through a direct delivery stream, which is funding provided directly to municipalities from the federal government. And that stream is at a 50% funding. And of course, the big issue with that is we did this 2022 pre-design report that estimated the cost of these wastewater treatment plant upgrades at just over 6.5 million. And we went back to the consultants that did that report for us and asked them to advise on what suitable escalation to 2026 dollars would be. That brings us up to close to $10 million. That does include the $1.2 million marine outfall project, which could be included in this grant funding, and that could potentially pay for half of that project. But it's a lot of money for a municipality to be coming up with. There is provisions that allow for the stacking of grant funding, which is of course uncertain. We haven't seen grant funding come up for this type of project until now, for the past number of years. There is an expectation that this CHIP funding program will be rolled out through a provincial and territorial agreement stream, which could provide potentially up to 75% grant funding. So we did have this question internally with staff, whether we apply for this grant through the direct delivery stream. Do we wait to potentially, which is uncertain, but potentially have this provincial agreement stream be rolled out that might provide a higher percentage of funding? And we decided that it would be important, or that we should be bringing this question to council and asking them to advise on whether we should apply for this grant, which would, bring some expectation that we're, willing and able to come up with our portion of the funding. Or do we hold off, not apply for it and wait for a better opportunity, which may potentially come through the provincial agreement stream of CHIF, or some other program that we don't know about yet. So that's really why we're here, to make this question to council. It's not it certainly hasn't been common over the last few years that we've been keeping our ear to the ground that grant funding opportunities for this type of thing don't come up at all. But certainly the interest in stimulating housing has led to this, and it may potentially lead to other grant funding. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to council for your consideration.
Councilor Morse.
Maybe I missed it in the reading it. The ecological environmental comment says upgrading the wastewater treatment plant would have environmental benefits because it would improve the discharge effluent. So it's part of this $8 million to go from secondary to tertiary.
No, it's not. That's just a comment that occasionally we do have, usually during wet weather conditions, we have discharge that exceeds our permitted discharge, or, in some cases comes close to it. And you generally get better treated effluent quality if you're remaining within your parameters of the treatment process. So that was all the comment was intended.
And the capacity of the plant now is,
The maximum that we can discharge is 227 cubic meters per
the
day.
227, yeah. And if we go higher than that, we're in a different license category and everything else.
Yeah.
And my other question, I guess, is, do you have statistics on how much water was distributed in 2024 and 2023 to all the Snug Cove sewer users?
How much water?
Yeah,
Um,
especially let's forget about and separated between summer and winter, because summer you're watering, and in winter you're not.
we could come up with those statistics. I don't have them at my fingertips.
I guess I should try to do a quick benefit of calculate how much the INI might be. I mean, my druthers at this point is we don't do anything until after we've done the INI. And because who knows if people are putting in their property rooftop drains into the sewer system. Which is part of my question about how much water was distributed from October to January or to March versus how much went into the sewer treatment plant.
Right.
And I don't know if there's been a report that has that in it or not. And if there's a chance of another grant for 75%, I'd certainly be happy about that. And I just can't see how we would possibly to go for it and apply for a grant and then not be able to come up with the money for the other part. Makes sense.
Councilor Getty, followed by Councilor Fast.
Did you say that this was not available for the outflow from the project?
No, it is. I think it would be appropriate we could include the outfall as part of the upgrades that we're applying for. I don't know that we would be successful in applying for the outfall only because that doesn't actually stimulate more housing. It is part of a broader upgrade that stimulates more housing by upgrading the wastewater treatment plant and having a bigger outfall. It's a part of that, but the outfall itself doesn't really meet the objectives of the program.
If there's some way that we could, phrase it so that, you know, it would, we could somehow squeak it in so that, I mean, that part of the project's almost shovel ready. And it seems to me that the expansion of the sewage district of the plant itself needs, there's a whole lot of discussions that we haven't had. So we thought it was so remote and difficult that it would be, and the $5 million 50%, keeps it in that range of being out of reach. I think that's really, so, and that would, and we're at the point where we're not quite sure about supply chain costs and how that's gonna change with respect to all the talk about tariffs and all the changes that are coming there. I'd like to know more about the overall maximum debt load that the municipality can take in terms of what those numbers might look like. We still haven't had the discussion in terms of whether or not it's general funds and the debt that the whole community takes on, or it's just the local service area. I don't know that we've had a lot of discussion yet. I don't feel like we've sorted out development contract charges or whatever they're called, DCCs, and deferred amenities in terms of how much other funding might be raised in the community with respect to that. If this funding is only available for improvements and new and growth as opposed to repairs and necessities, basically. And that's what I think you were talking about in terms of whether or not it would work for just this one. But and I don't know that we've necessarily had a discussion about it. It's a big focus, I would hope, for the OCP review is just what the growth plan is and what the outside limits and just what it is that we're building for in this area to have that, or in the sewage district, whether the sewage district expands, whether or not, you know, the overall growth in terms of having this $10 million project. What's it for? We've talked about needing it, and the only way that we're going to be able to have the moratorium lifted is if it's somehow or other protected or corrected. But and with respect to the moratorium, and I guess it's not directly related, but secondary is, you know, what Councillor Wake referred to in terms of some of these new developments coming in with tertiary treatment and not having the problems with this sewage outfall and or septic fields. And there's other places in the trust area that are talking about trying to work with the provincial health ministry in terms of getting more detailed, it's like all the improvements in septic, also improvements and changes with respect to gray water functioning and how do we take stuff out of the system that doesn't necessarily need full treatment. So if we're stuck, then I think we have, and we can't build the treatment, then I think we have to look at some of the other options. And if that's the only way that we can have any kind of growth in the cove, then we need to figure out what the limits are and what we can afford, I think. And that's a bigger discussion I would like to have more settled before we go into asking for money that we can't put our share up. So if we can't do the sewage outfall, then I think we should at least wait for the 75%. Hopefully that might make it more viable in terms of having some stacking and other forms of grants. But I personally feel like the $5 million price tag is astronomical and unattainable.
Thank you. I'm listening with great interest. It's interesting. It's only 10 years ago that we started to, when I joined council, I felt, and I don't know if this is true, but that was the beginning of getting much grant funding. I think we used to get small 12 to 15,000 planning grants. And it's only in the past little while that we've been able to tap into this revenue stream for municipality. So it's a way of bringing taxes back from Ottawa or from the province back to Bowen. So I'm looking at this opportunity that staff are bringing to us with great interest. But it's a lot of money. And we're coming into, as tariffs was mentioned, we're coming into uncertain times. Will this money be available next year or even in a few months? I don't know. Maybe we should apply for it now. We've heard from staff, I believe, that there's stacking possibilities. I read it in the report. Maybe, you know, I had been thinking maybe the risk would be better to put into the future, secure some, try to secure some grant funding and then think about the rest of it later. However, I also think we've been spending a lot on capital. I'm not seeing what's in the OCP now says that more housing and growth is supposed to be concentrated in the Cove as long as other density isn't developed in the green spaces of the island. There's a density transfer policy in the OCP that I never see referred to anymore, and it just seems like we're adding density in the Cove, which isn't it doesn't fit with the whole idea of keeping a balance and just concentrating density in the Cove. Anyway, I'm checking with staff right now. The affordable housing that Birch and Lookout Society are proposing, that's on septic, and the assisted living property is also going to be on septic, partly because of this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because of this.
Okay, because of this situation. But at least they're going ahead, and yeah, okay, I'm curious. I might be in support, but I'm interested to hear from others.
Just for my own edification, this funding stream, is this one of those funding streams that's contingent on not levying DCCs?
Apparently not.
There's a new development there on that front.
That went away.
Email you sent me.
Yes, correct. So there was a requirement under this grant program that municipalities under 30,000, providing they were part of a regional district that was in excess of 300,000, they had to convince their regional district to freeze their development charges. So I think that we were all a little bit wary that there wasn't much possibility that we could convince Metro Vancouver to freeze their development cost charges over the next 3 years. But the grant program did have a provision that if the municipality could propose alternative measures that would address the financial impacts of the regional district's DCC charges, that they could still be eligible. Well, then Friday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not sure what message this is sending, but the Canada Housing Investment Fund program manager sent an email out, I guess, to all potential applicants that said they're now waiving the requirement for DCCs to be frozen at the regional district level for a small municipality like us. If we're under 30,000, whether or not the regional district freezes their DCCs is irrelevant, and we are still permitted to apply. So that took that layer of complexity off of us. Either way, we were coming up with some potential mitigating proposals, but that's all moved now. So yeah, that was an interesting development.
Okay. And yeah, it seems like the federal government is getting more of an understanding what DCCs are all about. And just what's the back of the napkin math on 5 million of borrowing if it becomes a parcel tax?
I hate back to the, but I'll look it up for you right away. So if you.
Okay. Yeah, so just from this seat, it feels based around the conversation and some of my own thoughts that I think it's an interesting stream to hang on to. I think with the changes to the DCC's policy around it and what's coming, there might be more changes. I don't think we're in the position right now, or this is just a personal sense, it doesn't feel as if we're in the position right now to really move ahead with a major sewer expansion investment with $5 million of community funding. I think that's probably the big question mark going on, particularly with the parcel taxes involved, the outfall replacement. I would be curious to see if there is an integrated funding model coming down the pipes. I think that would be a much more viable one to apply for. And there's other dangling pieces that are emerging that feels like loops that we have to close. Councillor Morse referenced the I&I project. There is I know there's discussions around what a class 3 on-site septic could look like in those conversations with BCH, although from what I understand, that would involve the development of a liquid waste management plan, which is no small feat. I understand Public Works.
Won't cost 5 million.
What's that?
Wouldn't cost 5 million to do electric waste management.
Exactly. So, yeah, my feeling at this point is I think it's an interesting thing to look at. I wouldn't be prepared to support the recommendation as written, because it's also like as a major capital project, it's also not in our strategic plan right now. There's a lot of other pieces and components that I think we need to bring to the ground and get dealt with in our capital stream, including the community center, including local water. Do you have a number?
5 million at 4.5% over 30 years would be a debt servicing cost of 321,000 a year. So that's about a quarter of our existing debt servicing cost. I'd have to check. I don't even know that we have that capacity.
Right. What would that be per property?
Just per property in the sewer district.
Yeah.
Don't look at her when she's doing
You
that.
got 100.
Three at 32,000 a year.
No, let's go with 130.
So we'll get that number in a minute. From this
That's $2,500 a year
$2,500 a year,
for 30 years.
30 years on top of what's already been paid.
Yeah.
Where I do like it, I mean, it feels like if we want to apply, I mean, let's see what we get, and maybe because it feels like a bit of a Hail Mary that if we get, the 50% funding, and then some other granting stream emerges that's as of yet unknown and unnamed, maybe that could do it. The other challenge with the proposal, I think, as it is that it also ties up $1 million for housing accelerator money that then can't be applied to other places. I think it's interesting. It feels like, let's put it on the back burner. Let's see if the province makes a matching contribution. And my recommendation, the council, maybe just a motion to receive the report endorsing the recommendation.
I'll make that motion. I mean, these grant applications are not easy to apply for. They take a fair amount of time to prepare them, and it's due by the end of March. And we have no idea where the other half of the money would come from. And getting a grant and then saying, no, we don't want it because we don't have the other half of the money doesn't put you in a good stead for getting other grants. I'm happy to make the motion that we receive the report from staff.
Yeah, I saw Councillor Wake with his hand up, so I'll go to the speakers list here. Councillor Wake.
Well, maybe we should finish with this one. What I want to talk about is what the other alternative is. And I think it could apply to some of this funding, but we've got to figure it out first. But, we've got to look to the future, and we've got to look to what Europe is doing. It's all over Europe. And now North Vancouver is doing on-site tertiary treatment, and Fraser, in the Fraser Health region, same thing is happening. And, maybe some of this grant money could help us lead the way in getting approvals for that through a wastewater treatment plant or plan. I just think there's a huge opportunity there, but why don't we go ahead and deal with this, and then I'd be happy to make a motion.
Motion to receive that, Councillor Morse.
Oh.
Seconder. Second by Councillor Fast. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
And that carries unanimously. And then I'll hand the floor back over to you, Councillor Wake.
Okay, well, I didn't prepare a motion here, so I'm already in trouble. But I would like to move that we direct staff to work with some of our local island developers and some of the developers of projects in North Vancouver and fully explore the opportunity to move to on-site tertiary treatment.
I'm gonna say TERTIER, what?
SIT.
AR1.
Yeah.
Tertiary.
This is a committee of the whole, so it would be committee of the
Like
whole.
council directs to
Sorry,
council.
recommendation, yeah.
So that,
On-site tertiary treatment. Yep, so I'll have the corporate officer read it back and then we'll see if there's a seconder.
Can I ask a question first?
Yes.
When the mover says, to move to on-site tertiary treatment, are you proposing to replace the existing by saying move to, or are you proposing to add to the existing by saying move to, or are you proposing to add another, something else that's on a different site? Tim?
At this point, I'm not suggesting we add to what's in the cove. I think we need to have a fulsome discussion with the OCP steering committee on where everybody's talking about this. Where are we heading with capacity? And we've always been saying, well, the density should go in the cove. I know I've been saying it for a decade or more, but the reality is we don't have the sewer system to handle it, and we don't really have the space in the cove, and we don't have developers who are chomping at the bit to develop. So I'm thinking about the properties that are in the proximity of the cove, but far enough away from the cove and with larger lots where rather than tying in to a system that's already overloaded in the cove, it would make far more sense to have on-site treatment. So I'm thinking about Lot 1, I'm thinking about Parkview Slopes. The Grafton Lake might even be thinking about it. They do have a lot of room to do septic, but this is a much better way to do septic.
So I'm gonna pause things there because we don't yet have a motion that's been seconded, so I think that clarification is helpful. I'm gonna have staff read out the motion as written, and then we'll see if there's a seconder.
original verb or
I didn't make the motion, so I'll let you read it, and then we'll see if the mover agrees.
that the committee of the whole recommend the council direct staff to work with local island developers and developers of projects in North Vancouver to explore the opportunity to move to on-site tertiary treatment.
Maybe we should put the word wastewater treatment in there.
Okay, so it's moved and seconded. Councilor Wick, you have had the opportunity to motivate on the motion. Is there anything else you want to add before we open for discussion?
I think I think I've made my case, but happy to answer questions.
Not sure if it needs a clarification that it's for future developments. We're not talking about on-site additions to sewer treatment plant or something. So
Well, we can put the word,
Share screen?
yeah.
you can put future developments, and that's definitely what I'm not thinking about expanding capacity for existing developments.
Well, to explore the opportunity for on-site tertiary wastewater treatment for future development.
For future developments. Yeah.
Yeah, but change the word, explore moving to on-site rather than the opportunity to move.
That's fine.
Okay, so any objections to those as amendments? Just do that by unanimous consent. Not seeing any. Just from this seat, I'm gonna put a couple of rubber banks here on the conversation, given that we're 3.5 hours into a committee of the whole meeting. This is a big discussion. And also that my caution in this recommendation is that it's directing a significant amount of new work. So there's engaging with local island developers, there's engaging with developers of projects in North Vancouver, and then there's also the exploration of moving to tertiary wastewater treatment. And that scope of work is actually really large and not captured in our strategic plan at all, in a way that based on the last conversation of just simply applying for the grant to apply it to the existing treatment plan. It's like, we already have lots of projects. Why are we doing this? Feels like for me, there's just like a caution and warning. It was like, oh, like this is going to be a big thing to get into. So I feel that the conversation is probably valuable at this point in the afternoon and probably where we're at. My recommendation would be, before we really open the discussion on this, is this could be referred to one of our quarterly strategic planning sessions, or it could be referred to the infrastructure task force, or we could just leave it as is. Or the OCP committee, but this is the scope of this is actually quite large. So Councillor Fast with the first hand, followed by Councillor Getty.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be voting against this partly because it's giving a whole bunch of work to staff about more development in the area of the cove. This is even near the cove. It's not in the cove, and yet that's the kind of thing that our official community plan process will be dealing with, the whole business of growth. As I mentioned before, we also need to sustain ourselves in terms of having, we've got a density transfer trade-off system now. It's supposed to be in place, but it isn't working. And where if more density comes to the cove, it's supposed to be in return for less density in another part of the island. And that's in one of the schedules of the OCP. Anyway, I think this is a huge topic. This is basically directing staff to figure out how they can use this technology to bring more new development to the area around the cove. I'm not in favor of that without a lot of thought. And I don't mind if this idea of the technology gets, sorry, is something else going on?
No, they're just looking at just providing wording for a possible amendment. That's right.
I'll stop.
I think we're good.
Did,
The floor still
can I
is.
just finish?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I just think it would be an idea to take to the official community plan committee, but it's just it's exciting new technology. I like the idea of a better way to deal with septic, but not directing staff to figure out how to use it in order to grow the population. I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not in favor. Thank you.
Councillor Getty.
So I would be voting in favor, but on the understanding that this is the committee of the whole, it's the end of an afternoon. We started with this proposal that's really recent. It's like a nice shiny little bubble that's sitting there tempting us. And there's a whole bunch of other questions that have come up that need more discussion. This is to our purpose today is to recommend to council, and I think we can have this discussion in terms of whether it gets referred out, whether we continue with whether it fits with strategy, whether it's, on a work plan, all the rest of it. But I think at this late point in the day, I don't want to kill it. I would be voting in favor of this to get to council, and we can have a more detailed discussion there in terms of just the realities of it.
Councilor Morris.
So I was wondering about just shortening the motion to say that council, the committee of the whole recommends to council that council explore. What else did I write there,
I
Steph?
think you're taking out the part about the local island developers.
Yeah.
So I've shared it
I think
again.
it's a different motion.
It
No, I
could
didn't
be,
want to say direct staff, I was replacing direct staff to with council explore.
So council explore moving to on-site tertiary wastewater treatment for future developments.
Period. And then let's take a piece of
Sorry.
our plan session.
so we can have it as an amendment. Like, I'll be honest, like I'm on the verge of ruling the whole motion out of order just because.
It's not on the agenda.
Oh, yeah, we were on a grant application, and now we're looking at making a major right turn into a whole piece of wastewater strategy. And again, the part for me, it's like, but at the same time, because it's moved and seconded, there seems to be a desire to discuss it. Part of me wonders whether we should entertain it. But at the same time, I come back, I refer to our strategic planning session where we had department by department with spreadsheets of all the work that they're doing, all the work that's being taken on, all the things that have to happen. And this feels like a really new shiny piece that could probably be discussed or surfaced in some of those committees. That, I know Councillor Wake, you've been meeting with some folks in the community. I know Kieran's been talking to some folks about it. I would expect this to surface at some point after those discussions anyways, but as it stands, I'm happy to, I think where I sit is we can take the vote, but it's not something that I can support at this time, even if it is just in the committee of the whole to come back to the council. I think it'll come out later. But with a year and a half left in our term, starting something like this is feels big, and it makes me nervous. Like I feel like a nervous pit in my stomach. Okay, so seeing no further hands up.
We're not amending it, we're back to the way it was, right?
Yes, I didn't hear a formally moved and seconded it.
No, I was throwing it out as an idea.
Right, okay. So sorry, Councillor Wake, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I like the proposed amendment that we just had there. I think, what we need to do is get this idea out there. And the best way to do that, I think, is for us as committee of the whole to recommend to council to explore moving to on-site tertiary wastewater treatment. So, yeah, I'm fully in support of this. And as far as the workload goes, that's one of the challenges we'll have to deal with. But we're going to get a lot of help from whoever's going to be building these and developing the projects we're talking about, including, Birch and, yeah. So anyway,
So is
Yeah.
this amendment seconded? Is that?
Yeah, I haven't heard it.
So I'll move the amendment, which is the deletion of above. Staff has. So that it reads that the committee of the whole recommend that council explore moving to.
Okay, with Councillor Wake seconding.
Did you second that, Tim?
yes,
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
The committee of the whole recommend that council explore moving to on-site tertiary wastewater treatment for future developments. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion
On the amendment?
Amendment.
on the amendment? My only feedback is it's not council that does tertiary wastewater treatment plant, which is what it's referring to.
By exploring, you could get a little subcommittee of task force of interested bodies working on it.
Right, so now we're just adding to the governance structure,
No,
right? So let's just vote on this and.
thinking what you said on the
And decide,
website the other night.
yeah.
Can you blow it up?
Yes.
Committee of the whole recommend that council explore moving to on-site tertiary wastewater treatment for future developments. I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye on the amendment.
Aye.
All opposed, raise your hand and say nay.
Nay.
Nay. So that amendment is not carried with Councillor Fast, Getty, and Mayor Leonard in opposition. And we're back up to the main motion, which reads that the committee of the whole recommend or direct staff to work with local island developers and the developers of projects in North Vancouver to explore moving to on-site tertiary wastewater treatment plant for future developments. I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, raise your hand and say nay.
Nay.
That is not carried with Councillor Fast, Getty, Mayor Leonard, and
You got the other way around. First you
Morse in
voted,
opposition.
I'll do that in a minute on my desk. Thanks.
Okay. And with that, we are at adjournment.
Adjournment.
Moved by Council Morse, seconded by Council Getty. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that carries, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you to staff. Thank you to folks that joined. We will see everybody again soon.
And thanks for a great report. The